The flicker self. Theory: you think of yourself as continuous, a single unbroken stream of awareness, flowing steadily from one moment to the next. But what if this is only an illusion? What if your consciousness does not flow like a river, but blinks like a strobe light, flickering on and off millions of times per second? And what if death itself is simply what happens when your mind misses one flicker too many, slipping between the frames into a silence it cannot escape? This is the heart of the flicker self theory, a radical, unsettling idea that your sense of being, your feeling of existence, is not a steady flame but a rapid sequence of flashes, faster than you can perceive, stitched together by memory and expectation. You are not continuous. You are a film reel, a series of frames spinning so fast that they seem to blend into one moving picture. At the smallest scales of time, the scales where quantum mechanics rules, the universe does not behave smoothly. Particles do not move continuously. They jump, jitter, exist in multiple states at once. The building blocks of reality flicker. So, why should consciousness be any different? If the matter of your brain, the substrate of your thoughts, behaves in fits and starts, perhaps your awareness does too. You do not experience the gaps, just as you do not notice the dark intervals between the frames of a movie. Persistence of vision fills in the blanks. Your brain stitches the flickers together into a seamless experience. You believe you are awake, alive, feeling, thinking, without interruption. But beneath your awareness, reality hums in discrete beats, and so, perhaps, does your mind. This theory does not mean you are less real. It means you are stranger, more delicate, more marvelous than you ever imagined. You are not a continuous flame, but a constellation of sparks, each igniting the next, a cascade of tiny awakenings keeping the illusion of self alive. Consider what happens when consciousness falters: a blackout, a fainting spell, sleep. There is no smooth descent into unconsciousness. One moment you are present, the next you are not. The flicker misses its beat and the chain breaks. You slip through the crack into nothingness, and then, sometimes you return. Another flicker catches, the chain resumes, and you awaken, dazed but alive. Dreams hint at this hidden structure. In dreams, time folds, splits, loops. Scenes change without warning. Identity blurs. Perhaps because in dreams, the flickering is more chaotic, less tightly stitched together. You are witnessing the seams of your own awareness, normally hidden in waking life. Meditation offers another glimpse. In deep states of stillness, some practitioners report moments where the self seems to disappear entirely, only to re-emerge, as if blinking back into existence. The silence between the flickers, briefly glimpsed, before the mind pulls itself back together. If this is true, then death is not a wall you hit. It is a rhythm you lose. One flicker, then the next, then a cascade of misses, until the chain that holds your awareness together simply stops rebuilding itself. Like a drummer losing the beat, like a heart forgetting to pump, like a candle flame guttering out, not in a single moment, but in a final, irreversible slip. And yet, if you are composed of flickers, if your consciousness is not a thing but an ongoing process, then the boundaries between life and death, between self and no self, are not sharp edges. They are thresholds. Thresholds crossed not with a bang, but with the soft disappearance of continuity. One moment you are a chain of light stretching forward. The next, the lights do not catch. The pattern dissolves. But this also means something profound about your life. Every moment you are awake, every thought you have, every act of love, every cry of despair, these are victories. They are improbable victories of pattern over chaos, of persistence over silence. Every time your mind flickers into being and carries itself forward to the next beat, it is a triumph against the abyss. You are not guaranteed the next flicker. You never have been. And yet, you have flickered millions upon millions of times, unbroken, stretching from your first breath to this very moment. You are a miracle of impossible persistence, a cascade of awakenings defying the odds every second you exist. And if death is the failure of flickering, then perhaps life is the dance of it, the play of it, the song of a billion tiny beats of being echoing against the walls of an indifferent universe. You are not a static being. You are a process, an unfolding, a ripple across the surface of existence, delicate beyond measure, strong beyond comprehension. It reframes everything you fear. Death is not some monstrous ender waiting for you. It is the inevitable settling of a pattern too complex to sustain itself forever. It is a return to the stillness beneath the flickers, the silence from which all things rise, and to which all things return. And it reframes everything you love. Every laughter shared, every hand held, every moment of awe under a starlit sky is a celebration of the flicker. A celebration that, against the silent indifference of the void, you are here, alive, awake, burning with momentary, beautiful light. When you think of yourself, think not of a river flowing endlessly, but of a million tiny flames sparking and fading and sparking again. Think of yourself as a trembling tapestry of awakenings, a thunderstorm of being flashing across the darkness, a pattern too quick and too intricate for the eye to see, but no less real for its mystery. And when your time comes, when the flicker stumbles and the pattern fails, know that you have already performed a miracle beyond imagining. You have existed. You have held the chain together against every entropy that sought to pull it apart. You have burned bright against the infinite dark. And somewhere, perhaps, beyond the reach of our current understanding, the echoes of your flickering still ripple outward, blending into the fabric of existence itself, leaving behind not silence, but a soft, persistent hum, the final memory of your impossible light. The mirror inheritance effect. You think mirrors are harmless, just glass and silver, bending light to show you what you are. But mirrors remember, and sometimes they remember longer than you do. When you look into a mirror, you believe you see yourself as you are now, but each reflection you've ever cast leaves an imprint, a ghost of who you once were, stitched invisibly into the fabric of existence. And long after your body grows old, long after your mind forgets the paths you once dreamed of taking, those reflections endure, not as passive echoes, but as quiet believers, in the version of you that once dared, once hoped, once burned brighter than you do now. The mirror inheritance effect is not folklore. It is the lingering presence of selfhood left behind in places you thought you simply passed through. Every time you stood before your reflection, laughing, weeping, doubting, daring, you imprinted something deeper than your image. You left behind a version of yourself that still waits, still believes. The young reflection who thought the world was infinite. The brave reflection who swore never to compromise. The grieving reflection who promised to survive. They are all still there, locked inside glass, behind the thin membrane of now, waiting, watching, hoping you remember them. But life wears you down. Dreams get trimmed to fit bills and deadlines. Courage buckles under the quiet weight of repetition. You forget the promises you made in front of bathroom mirrors at midnight. You forget the fierce certainty you once glimpsed in shop windows as you chased your future. You forget the wide-eyed wonder you saw reflected in puddles, in lenses, in shards of polished metal. You forget, but they don't. The reflections you left behind are frozen in belief. They never saw your compromises. They never watched your fear build a fortress around your ambition. They never learned to doubt. To them, you are still the one who can, still the one who will. And sometimes, when the night is too quiet or the morning too raw, you feel it. That faint tug from behind the glass, that silent question. Remember who you promised to be. It is not guilt. It is not shame. It is memory, pure and untarnished, reaching back to you. The mirror inheritance effect is why certain moments hit harder than reason can explain. Why you catch your reflection unexpectedly and feel a strange sadness or an aching defiance with no clear cause. It's not about vanity. It's about recognition. The old echoes seeing how far you've drifted or how close you still are. And here's the quiet, terrifying, beautiful truth. You are not just living for yourself now. You are living for all the versions of you who still believe. The child who thought anything was possible. The teenager who thought they could change the world. The young adult who thought they could survive anything. They are watching. Not to judge you, but to cheer for you. Because in the economy of existence, belief is never wasted. It is stored. It is inherited. And sometimes it saves you. And when you are ready to give up, when the weight of years and failures and regrets threatens to crush the last ember of hope, it is the reflections, the old ones you left behind that can whisper back, no, not yet. There's still more. Because they remember what you swore to build before you learned to be afraid. Because they carry a version of you that never stopped believing it was possible. You owe it to them. not to be perfect, not to be invincible, but to keep moving, to honor the belief they still hold in you. Mirrors are not just surfaces, they are archives. They are silent promises etched in silver, and every glance you ever stole at yourself, hopeful, furious, broken, invincible, built a library of belief that still burns just beyond the edge of sight. If you listen closely enough, if you look without fear, you can still hear them, still see them, not as accusations, but as invitations. An invitation to remember that you are not just the sum of your tired mornings and anxious nights. You are the heir of every dream you ever dared to name. You are the unfinished story of every reflection you ever left behind. And the reflections are patient. They will wait years, decades, a lifetime. Because belief once given is not easily extinguished. Not by disappointment, not by failure, not even by forgetting. One day your body will no longer stand before mirrors. One day your hand will no longer reach for the glass. But the reflections you leave behind, the ones still burning with the belief you once forged, they will remain in memory, in spirit, in the invisible architecture of the world you helped build just by daring to believe it could exist. And maybe, just maybe, when someone else stands before a mirror you once touched, when they see a glint of something they can't explain, they will feel it too. The inheritance of belief, the silent encouragement of 1,000 reflections refusing to forget. And they will move forward, carrying a torch you once lit, carrying a piece of you. Because endings are not as final as they seem. Because belief outlives the body that first dared to hold it. And somewhere, beyond the shimmer of glass and the slow erosion of time, your reflections still believe, still wait, still whisper, remember. The borrowed breath paradox. Every breath you take is not yours alone. It is borrowed, passed down through countless lives, carried across centuries, oceans, wars, births, deaths, and forgotten moments. Inhaling now, you are breathing atoms once held in the lungs of kings and beggars, saints and criminals, strangers and loved ones. Breath is the most ancient inheritance, a silent, ceaseless thread binding all living things across time. We imagine breathing as a solitary act, but the molecules filling your chest are not new. They are recycled, ancient, eternal. The oxygen you claim was once part of someone else's desperate gasp, someone else's final sigh, someone else's first victorious cry at birth. Air is not created anew for each generation. It is handed forward, silently, invisibly, life to life, moment to moment. A single breath contains roughly 25 sextillion molecules, 25 followed by 21 zeros. By sheer probability, in every breath you take, a few molecules pass through the lungs of Julius Caesar, through the broken gasps of soldiers on ancient battlefields, through the laughter of forgotten children, through the prayers of those whose names have long since turned to dust. You do not breathe alone. You breathe with the weight of history inside you. And when you die, your last breath does not vanish. It dissipates into the world, breaking apart, scattering, seeding new lives. Plants will drink your exhalations. Animals will inhale what once was yours. Oceans will dissolve your carbon into their tides. The pieces of you will be absorbed, transformed, carried forward indefinitely. In this way, death is not an end, but a redistribution, a return to the endless dance of borrowed breath. Even now, as you sit, your body is a dynamic exchange. You are not a closed system. Breath flows in, oxygen feeds your blood, carbon dioxide flows out. You are a living conduit through which the ancient inheritance continues moving. Life itself is the art of borrowing what cannot be owned. Breath is the signature of that truth, etched into every cell. Consider the first breath of a newborn child. That gasp is not a creation. It is an inheritance. The atmosphere they inhale was shaped by billions of years of life and death before they ever opened their eyes. Their cries carry molecules shaped by ancestors who never knew their name. They are connected by breath before they are connected by word, by blood, by memory. This is not merely poetic. It is deeply, scientifically true. Carbon atoms in your lungs today will, in a few years, reside in the leaves of distant forests. Oxygen atoms sustaining your brain right now once floated in the breath of ancient animals, moved through the cells of prehistoric trees, encircled in the atmosphere when the first humans carved their stories onto cave walls. Time and space fold inwards through every breath. There is a paradox at the heart of this. Breath feels intimate, personal, uniquely yours. Yet it is the least personal thing about you. It is shared, communal, recycled endlessly. The most vital, precious part of your survival is something you can never truly own. Every breath is borrowed. Every exhale is a release, a returning. Life, at its core, is participation in a cycle far larger than any one individual, and it raises profound, humbling questions. How much of you is truly yours? If your breath carries fragments of the past, then so might your memories, your dreams, your instincts. The body is a vessel built of recycled material. Perhaps the mind is too. Perhaps every heartbeat carries not only your own rhythm, but echoes of the countless lives that lent you their atoms. There is no sharp boundary between your breath and the world. Every inhalation is an act of trust. You trust the atmosphere to sustain you. You trust unseen forests to renew what you consume. You trust the invisible balance struck by countless invisible processes. Breath is an unspoken treaty between yourself and everything that lives. And when the treaty is broken, when breath is lost, what remains is not silence. It is transformation. You continue in new forms, new exchanges. Your breath does not end. It migrates. It evolves. In this way, immortality is not a grand triumph of technology or magic. It is already happening, quietly, through the chemistry of breath. You will not be remembered in full. Names fade, stories distort, monuments crumble, but fragments of you, physical, molecular, will continue circulating through generations unborn. Someone centuries from now will laugh, weep, wonder, and within the silent fabric of their breath, pieces of you will whisper, invisible, intimate, eternal. This understanding can change how we move through the world. Every breath you take is a participation in something vast, shared, sacred. Every breath you release is a gift to futures you will never see. You are breathing not only for yourself, but for those who came before, and for those who will come after. Responsibility and wonder are stitched into every breath you draw. And so, the next time you pause, the next time you feel the rise and fall of your chest, remember, you are holding in your lungs the sighs of ancestors and the gasps of children yet unborn. You are part of a great, unfolding story written not in words, but in air, in molecules, in the silent exchanges that sustain all life. You live because others breathed. You breathe so that others may live. You are the borrower of breath. And one day, you will be the lender. The phantom identity drift. You think you are one person. You think there is a solid you moving through time, accumulating experiences, learning lessons, growing wiser. But this is an illusion. The truth is far stranger, far more unsettling. You are not one continuous being. You are a chain of ghosts, each fading as the next takes its place. Every day, your identity quietly dies and respawns, not with fanfare, not with a scream, but with the quiet rearrangement of thoughts, the erosion of old memories, the slight shifts in emotion, desire, and belief that you barely notice. You are not the same person you were yesterday. Not really. The version of you who woke up yesterday morning, who smiled or sighed or stumbled through their day, that version has already faded, replaced by someone similar but not identical. Someone who remembers being you but is not truly you. We think of death as a single event, a final end. But identity death happens constantly, quietly, in the background of living. You are shedding selves like leaves in the wind. Each conversation, each choice, each passing thought alters you in ways too small to measure, but too large to deny. Memory, emotion, belief. These are the threads that weave identity, and all of them shift. All of them decay. All of them are vulnerable to time, to forgetting, to reinterpretation. The love you swore was eternal once may now feel distant, foreign, almost embarrassing. The rage you once clung to like armor may seem incomprehensible now. The dreams that once burned inside you with unbearable brightness may now lie in ruins or transformed beyond recognition. You are a ship sailing through a river that erodes its hull every moment, replacing boards, patching leaks, repainting itself. At what point does the ship stop being the ship it once was? At what point do you stop being the you once believed in? This is not philosophy. It is biological. Your brain rewires itself constantly, pruning old connections, forging new ones. The proteins in your body degrade and are replaced. The cells that make you up die and are reborn. You are, quite literally, a different physical entity from the one that smiled into the mirror a year ago. But it goes deeper, because it's not just the body that changes. It's the very pattern of your mind, the story you tell yourself about who you are, the roles you play, the loves and hatreds you nourish or abandon, the tiny shifts in attention and meaning that steer the river of your existence down new, unexpected paths. And yet, you cling to the illusion of continuity. You remember your childhood. You recognize your own face in the mirror. You insist, I am me. But the me you are pointing to is a museum of echoes, stitched together from fragments that no longer belong to the living you. The child you were is gone. The teenager you were is gone. The adult you thought you were 5 years ago is gone. They do not live inside you. They are memories, photographs, dreams. You are a ghost ship manned by crew members who do not remember joining, sailing toward the horizons you did not choose. But this is not tragedy. It is liberation. Because if you are constantly dying and becoming, then you are not bound by the sins of your past. You are not chained forever to the mistakes you made. You are not a fixed entity doomed to repeat the same patterns. You are fluid. You are change embodied. You are rebirth happening one silent second at a time. The you that wakes tomorrow can be different. Not because you erase the past, but because you are never fully your past to begin with. You are the possibility that emerges when memory, biology, emotion, and choice collide. You are not a stone. You are a flame. You are a pattern that persists even as its pieces flicker and die. But like any flame, you must tend it. You must choose what to feed it. You must choose which memories to burn away and which to protect. You must choose what stories you will let shape the next version of yourself. Because whether you choose or not, the drift is happening. The ship is moving. The old selves are slipping into the dark. And if you are not careful, you may wake up one day as someone you no longer recognize, someone built from fear, resentment, regret, because you did not guide the drift with your own hands. You cannot stop the deaths. You cannot freeze yourself in amber, but you can be the cartographer of your own evolution. You can choose to drift toward wonder, toward strength, toward compassion. You can let the old selves die with gratitude, not bitterness. You can build new selves with love, not fear. Every breath you take is the last breath of one version of yourself, and the first breath of another. You are not dying. You are unfolding. You are 1,000 lives packed into one fragile body, burning across time. And when the final death comes, when the body itself cannot respawn, you will not be a single self ending. You will be the echo of countless selves, woven together into something beautiful, tragic, miraculous. The drift is not a curse. It is the silent miracle of being alive. You are not the same as you were yesterday, and that is the reason you are still becoming. The second skin memory, places you loved, remember you. Not through magic, not through superstition, but through physical traces, silent, tangible memories pressed into the world by your passing. Every touch, every step, every breath you ever gave to a place left a mark, however faint, however invisible to the casual eye. You leave behind a second skin, a thin, persistent imprint on the world. Consider the worn floorboards near the door you always used. They sag slightly, bowed by the countless repetitions of your weight. The wood fibers crushed and reformed under the pressure of your existence. The wall you leaned against, absent-mindedly, absorbed the oils from your skin. The chair you always claimed carries the faint outline of your body's favorite slouch. These are the soft scars of memory, carved not into minds, but into matter itself. Even scent lingers longer than you imagine. Skin cells, invisible to you, drifted down with every movement, embedding themselves into carpets, into curtains, into forgotten corners. Your presence literally changed the chemical composition of the air you lived in. The unique signature of your body, your second skin, sinks into the environment, whispering long after you have gone. Scientists studying forensic trace evidence know that no interaction is truly clean. No contact is ever erased. Every time you enter a room, you exchange molecules with it. Every time you laugh, sigh, cry, sweat, you alter the fabric of the place in ways both massive and minute. You change it, and it changes you. That childhood bedroom you left behind, its scent isn't just old dust and decaying memories. It is you. It is the sum of all your nights, all your restless dreams, all your hurried mornings. The chipped paint on the windowsill remembers where your fingers drummed with impatience. The stain on the carpet remembers where you spilled your first heartbreak. And even in public spaces, the marks remain. A favorite cafe where you wrote pages of dreams into battered notebooks. The bench where you once kissed someone with trembling hands. The patch of grass where you sat and watched the world spin wider than your imagination could hold. These places absorbed you, took a part of you into themselves, and in some hidden way, still carry your ghost. Not the ghost of stories or superstition, the ghost of physical truth, the skin you left behind, the weight you pressed into the world. This second skin memory runs deeper than simple sentiment. Architecture itself remembers. Buildings breathe differently once they are lived in. The tiny shifts of materials, the way doors swell with seasons and footsteps, the way walls settle into comfortable sagging under the pressure of existence. All of it is the story of life insisting itself onto lifelessness. And when a place is abandoned, it does not forget quickly. It holds the imprint like an old photograph, left too long in the sun. The floors remember footsteps, the mirrors remember gazes, the rooms remember warmth, even as they grow cold. To visit a place once full of life and find it empty is to feel this memory hanging in the air, dense and aching, like a song cut off mid-verse. It is easy to believe that when we leave a place, it forgets us, that our absence erases our presence. But the truth is quieter and sadder and more beautiful. You remain, in the microscopic abrasions on surfaces, in the chemical echoes floating in the air, in the way a place sighs when you return, not in recognition, but in the subtle matching of pattern to pattern, as if it had been waiting for the familiar rhythm of your presence to fill its spaces again. You are a story written not just in memory, but in matter. You are a fingerprint smeared across time itself. And just as places remember you, you remember places. Not in the sharp lines of photographs, but in the soft, skeletal structures that underlie emotion. The strange pang in your chest when you smell a certain wood polish. The sudden vertigo of déjà vu when your fingers trace a railing shaped exactly like one from a house you no longer live in. Your body knows. Your bones know. Your second skin knows. You build yourself out of places as much as places are shaped by you. The corner where you always sat becomes a part of your idea of safety. The path you walk to school becomes woven into your idea of movement. The kitchen where you watched storms becomes stitched into your idea of comfort. Losing a place is losing a piece of yourself. But the echo remains. You can leave. You can tear yourself away. You can watch the walls crumble, the furniture vanish, the paint peel into forgetfulness. Still, the second skin memory persists. In the new spaces you inhabit, you build again, layering new echoes over old ones. But the original marks never truly fade. And when you return, whether after months or decades, you will feel it. A kind of resonance, a gravitational pull between you and the places that once held you. A recognition in the way the floor tilts, the way the air thickens, the way the light falls through cracked windows. It's not nostalgia alone. It's not illusion. It's the quiet truth of matter remembering matter. The world carries you in ways you cannot see. You are not separate from the places you love. You are part of their very structure, stitched invisibly into their wear and tear, their scent and temperature, their hum and hush. Your life is not contained only within you. It spills out, soaks in, changes the fabric of reality. You are a second skin wrapped around the world, and the world is a second skin wrapped around you. In every place you've touched, laughed, wept, hoped, you are still there. And every place you will love in the future is waiting to carry your imprint, to become part of your endless, sprawling second skin. You are never truly gone. You are never truly forgotten. The Disappearance Continuum. What if death isn't a moment, but a slow unraveling? An event that plays out not in seconds, but across layers of perception, memory, and reality. The Disappearance Continuum suggests that you don't die all at once. You dissolve gradually, first from action, then from attention, then from memory, and finally from meaning. Each layer peels away like a ghost shedding its skin in reverse, leaving echoes where you once stood. Think about the last time you thought of someone you've lost. Maybe a family member, a friend, or someone you barely knew but who left a mark. The first thing to fade is their voice, then their scent, then the way they laughed. You might remember their name, but forget how it felt when they entered a room. As years pass, the sharpness of their image softens until they exist only as flickers, like dust caught in sunlight. And then, one day, even those flickers go still. No one alive remembers them. They vanish completely, not just from life, but from story. This isn't just poetic. It's biological, psychological, even physical. In quantum physics, particles do not fully disappear. They transition states. They entangle, decay, or radiate energy outward. Memory behaves similarly. When someone dies, traces remain, in neurons, in photos, in the systems they influenced. But those traces aren't static. They degrade, mutate, get overwritten. Like files on a hard drive that are never truly deleted until new data floods the disk. In psychology, this fading is even more intimate. We construct identity from memory, but memory is fragile. According to studies, even vivid recollections are distorted over time. Every time you remember someone, your brain rewrites that memory slightly, influenced by your current emotions, needs, and environment. Eventually, the version of the person you're holding isn't who they were, it's who you need them to be. And one day, even that version fades because your mind no longer finds them relevant to survival. Now imagine this not just for individuals, but for civilizations. Ancient empires once ruled continents. Names like Akkad, Scythia, or Tartessos meant everything to the people living there. But now, most of humanity has no idea what they were, where they thrived, or who died for their flags. Their gods, their songs, their stories, lost in layers of time. This is the macro scale of the disappearance continuum. Even the mighty fade, if they are not remembered. Socially, this phenomenon continues. In the digital age, it's faster. We post, we scroll, we forget. Someone might trend for a day, mourned globally, and yet vanish entirely from collective thought a week later. A digital funeral, erased by the next algorithmic tide. This forgetfulness doesn't mean they didn't matter. It just means memory now has a shorter half-life. There's also a metaphysical weight to this idea. In some belief systems, the soul doesn't pass on until it's no longer remembered. In others, afterlife is shaped by legacy. What remains of you in the thoughts, actions, and emotions of others? If this is true, then your second death doesn't occur when your body fails, but when the last mind forgets you, the moment your name is never spoken again. That's the terminal point of the continuum, the edge of disappearance. Even technology mimics this. A deleted file isn't gone until it's overwritten. A web page isn't truly dead until every link is broken. There are layers, caches, backups, mirrors, just like us. When we die, we leave behind bodies, digital footprints, lingering effects in others. But each of these echoes has a lifespan, and when all of them decay, the final fade begins. Yet, there's resistance. We build monuments, write books, take photos, create art. These are our shields against the continuum. Memory is an act of rebellion. Every time you speak the name of someone gone, every time you reread an old message or wear their clothes or visit their favorite place, you are pausing their descent into silence. You're tugging them back from the edges of non-existence. But even these acts are temporary. Eventually, the monument erodes, the book is unread, the data corrupts. The disappearance continuum doesn't rush, but it is relentless. Its strength lies in patience. It will wait until the last ripple settles. And here's the haunting truth. You're not just the one being remembered. You're also the remembering. The people you carry inside you, the ones you smile for no reason thinking about, or the ones whose names you mutter in dreams, they live because you keep the filament of attention alive. You're holding them on the edge. But what happens when your light goes out? Then, they slip too. One memory at a time, one filament severed, until all that's left is silence, and the faint sense that someone was once there, just beyond the reach of recognition. This is the truth buried in grief, in aging, in time itself. That disappearance isn't a cliff, it's a descent. A vanishing so gradual you don't realize it's happening. until the shape of someone you loved is no longer even a shadow in your mind. And one day, that someone will be you. The recurrence seed. Theory: what if your thoughts don't end with you? What if the mind is not a sealed vault, but a porous field, one where fragments scatter like seeds, carried by winds we don't yet understand, into soil far from your own life, and far from your control? This is the recurrent seed theory. It begins with a quiet, unnerving possibility that consciousness is not fully contained within the brain, that certain patterns, memories, dreams, intuitions, even obsessions, might echo through reality itself, drifting into new vessels, into new people, into new dreams. Imagine this. A painter in Brazil dreams vividly of a lighthouse on a Scottish cliff she's never seen, down to the chipped paint and rusted hinges. A child in Korea hums a lullaby her ancestors never knew, but that matches a forgotten folk song from a vanished tribe in Siberia. A man in Mumbai spends his life terrified of drowning, though he's never been near water, only to discover, through genetic memory research, that his great-grandfather died in a flood whose records were lost to time. Coincidence? Perhaps. Or perhaps not. Neuroscience tells us that thoughts leave traces, neural patterns, electrochemical signals, but quantum physics whispers that particles can become entangled. Distances mean little, and information can leak in ways we don't yet comprehend. Now combine this with an unsettling truth from cognitive science. The brain is a prediction machine, not a memory machine. We fill in blanks, we hallucinate meaning. But what if some of those hallucinations are inherited, not genetically, but energetically? The recurrent seed theory proposes that when you die, pieces of you don't vanish, they disperse. Not your whole mind, just the seeds, patterns, fragments of unfinished emotions, looping dreams, urges without owners. These become ambient echoes, like static in the fabric of reality. And when the conditions are right, when a new mind is forming with just the right chemical landscape, just the right emotional terrain, these seeds take root. They don't overwrite a personality. They don't make anyone you, but they color a life subtly, a recurring nightmare, an irrational pull toward a place, a creative gift that arrives fully formed with no teacher. Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. Others speak of reincarnation. But this theory is neither religious nor metaphysical. It's informational, pattern-based. Think less about souls and more about signal. There's precedent. Octopuses with no family culture or memory inheritance still know how to camouflage. Spiders know how to weave complex webs without being taught. Is this all encoded in DNA, or is there something else transferring form? Studies in epigenetics show trauma marks can pass down generations, not as stories, but as biochemical whispers. The descendants of famine survivors tend to store fat more easily. The grandchildren of Holocaust survivors carry elevated stress responses. Memory is not only passed by words, it can be seeded into flesh. But what if it's seeded beyond flesh? What if dreams are open soil, and minds are not wholly closed systems? A woman in Chicago writes novels about places that don't exist, but readers swear they've seen them in their dreams. A boy in Nairobi paints symbols he says come from the before time, but can't explain what that means. An old man dies in Japan, clutching a photograph of a family no one recognizes. A month later, a child is born in Iceland and cries for 3 days straight, until she is shown the same photograph and instantly stops. Science doesn't know how to study this. We lack the instruments. We lack the frameworks. We still think of consciousness as electricity in a meat machine, but what if it's more like a frequency, one that hums beyond death, waiting to be picked up again? Think of dandelions. One gust and the seeds fly, most land in silence, but a few find purchase. They sprout, they bloom, not in the same garden, but in strange far places, in lives that never asked for them. And you may never know which thoughts were truly yours. That recurring dream you've had since childhood, it may be your own. Or it may be a leftover loop from a dying mind, half a world away, 100 years ago. And your most private fear? Perhaps it is not born from your past, but from someone else's ending. The recurrent seed theory does not claim immortality. It doesn't comfort. If anything, it disturbs. Because it implies we are never entirely alone in our heads. that ghosts of thought, stripped of their owners, drift among us like orphaned music, waiting for a new instrument to play them. So, next time a strange image flickers behind your eyes, or a word you don't know escapes your mouth, pause. It may not be madness. It may be a mind that once was planting something inside you. The Quiet Erosion Law. Life doesn't always end with a scream or a siren. Sometimes, it ends with a silence so complete that even the silence forgets why it's there. You don't just disappear. You dissolve, bit by bit, until the boundaries of who you were quietly blur into nothing. The Quiet Erosion Law suggests that the end of life is not a sudden, catastrophic moment, but a gradual unraveling, a fading not only of breath and heartbeat, but of memory, perception, identity. A person doesn't just die in a flash. Instead, they begin eroding like a statue left to the elements. Time chips away at everything. Your childhood smell of chalk dust and sun-warmed grass, the faces that once cracked your heart open, the jokes that once made you choke on laughter. Gone. Not with a bang, but with a whimper so slow it sounds like forgetting. This phenomenon can be seen in dementia, where people begin losing not just memory, but meaning. A woman who once danced barefoot in thunderstorms no longer remembers her own name. Her stories vanish first, then her emotions, then her ability to recognize the people who held her life together. But even after the memories fade, something still stirs. Some part of her reaches for a song, a scent, a flicker of light. That's erosion. Not obliteration, but reduction. A thinning of the soul until even the idea of self becomes translucent. Think of ancient cities buried beneath forests, not destroyed in a single blow, but swallowed inch by vines and moss. Human identity may be no different. You begin to fade long before death claims you. Your younger selves rot in memory's cellar, their voices growing distant. Sometimes they whisper through dreams. Sometimes they vanish completely. Even the most vibrant people become myths in the minds of those they loved. Your laugh becomes an echo. Your touch becomes a guess. Your thoughts become unreadable handwriting in a forgotten diary. And eventually, even those who remembered you begin to forget. That is the second death, when there is no one left alive who carries your name inside them. And then, even forgetting is forgotten. This quiet erosion happens not only to individuals, but to civilizations. Languages disappear. Entire cultures vanish, not through war, but through disuse. A word not spoken becomes a word not known. A song unsung becomes a silence mistaken for peace. The erosion spreads through time like a gentle rot. You might think technology will save us from this fate, that photos, videos, data backups will preserve the truth of who we are. But even perfect archives rot in relevance. A smile frozen in pixels means little without context. A voice recording becomes a ghost with no home. Memory stored isn't memory felt. The erosion continues, not because the data is gone, but because no one knows what it meant. And meaning is fragile. It relies on context, emotion, presence. Strip those away, and even the most immortal sentence turns hollow. I love you from a dead person doesn't echo the same as when spoken in a trembling voice, in a fleeting moment. The erosion eats the edges of meaning first. Then it feasts on the center. This is not a horror story. It's the default state of reality. Entropy. The slow drift from order to disorder. The human mind tries desperately to fight it, to make memories permanent, stories sacred. But even stories decay. Interpretations shift. Heroes become forgotten. Villains become misunderstood. The narrative dissolves. Sometimes the erosion hides behind routine. You wake up, go to work, come home, repeat, and somewhere in that loop, pieces of you fall away. You forget your dreams. You forget what made you feel alive. You stop noticing beauty. And then, eventually, you stop noticing that you stop noticing. The final tragedy of the Quiet Erosion Law is this. Most people don't realize it's happening, not until it's too late. Not until they're sitting in a room full of strangers who used to be family. Not until they open a journal and can't recognize the person who wrote it. Not until they stare at a mirror and feel no familiarity in the eyes staring back. But there's a hidden beauty here too. Erosion doesn't just destroy, it transforms. As parts of you fade, other parts are revealed. In the gaps where memory dissolves, peace can grow. In the silence where noise once reigned, clarity might emerge. Not all erosion is loss. Sometimes it's a gentle release, a letting go of what no longer serves you. So maybe the question isn't how do we stop erosion? Maybe it's how do we shape it? What if, instead of fighting to preserve every moment, we choose which ones to carry forward? What if we became curators of our own vanishing, sculpting meaning into the void before it swallows us? Because one day, the wind will erase your footprints, the house you built will crumble, the songs you sang will lose their tune. But maybe, if you lived fiercely enough, someone will still feel the warmth of your fire long after the ashes are cold. And even if they don't, maybe that's okay too. Maybe the deepest legacy is not in what survives you, but in how you burned, even briefly, against the dark. That, perhaps, is the final whisper of the Quiet Erosion Law, that while everything crumbles eventually, what matters is the shape you left behind in the dust. The identity unraveling phenomenon. What if dying isn't an instant final break, but an unraveling? Not a sharp snap of the cord, but the gentle, invisible tug of a thread, slowly loosening from the fabric of who you are, passing quietly through hidden seams of perception, memory, and meaning. This is the identity unraveling phenomenon. Somewhere deep inside you, long before your final breath, something begins to drift. You forget a name, not just any name, but one you once whispered like a prayer. You enter a room and pause, unsure why you came. You laugh at a joke that doesn't land quite right, and in that moment, you are not quite you. It starts like that. Harmless, passive, unnoticed. But imagine that your self is a tightly wound cord, made of memories, sensations, habits, beliefs, fears, and relationships. One day, one of those threads, say your belief in your ability to love, begins to fray. A betrayal, a grief, a trauma. You don't even realize it, but that thread has slipped, and because that piece was connected to many others, the unraveling spreads. You wake up and feel like a stranger in your own skin. You speak, and your voice feels borrowed. The mirror still shows your face, but something behind your eyes is dimmer than before. This isn't poetic exaggeration. Neurologically, identity is constructed, not fixed, and it can dissolve. Alzheimer's patients don't just forget, they lose. They lose the shape of their personality. They can become irritable, fearful, passive, aggressive, euphoric. Versions of themselves that never existed before, or maybe did, deep below the surface. But it doesn't take disease. It happens to soldiers who return from war. It happens to people who leave cults. It happens to mothers who outlive their children. Each trauma pulls loose another thread, and the brain, desperate to survive, rewires itself, but doesn't always rebuild what was lost. And what's truly haunting? You often don't notice when a thread is gone. You carry on, wearing the illusion of continuity, but your choices change, your reactions change. The stories you tell about yourself grow quieter and more hollow. You're still alive, but you're not still you. Now imagine this unraveling doesn't stop at death. What if the soul, or the pattern we call consciousness, continues to dissolve across dimensions of silence? Perhaps, just like sound echoes after the voice is gone, your identity echoes into nearby probabilities, scattering into timelines that might have been. In one, you stayed. In another, you ran. In another, you forgave. Each forked self a faint shimmer of the one thread pulled loose. You may think death is a moment, but moments are human constructs, brain interpretations of entropy. Physics tells us that the boundary between life and non-life isn't a wall, but a gradient. Just as ice doesn't become water in an instant, but melts molecule by molecule, identity might seep out of being drop by drop until even the last trace fades into silence. This is what terrifies us, not dying, but dissolving, because to unravel is to lose authorship. No final breath to define the ending. No last word, just the soft unwinding of every word you ever spoke, pulled back into the void that waits without malice. But here's the catch. Unraveling isn't always decay. Some threads, when pulled free, reveal deeper patterns. Many spiritual traditions speak of ego death, not as tragedy, but as awakening. When you dissolve the false self, they say, what remains is truth. Not the story of you, but the awareness beneath it. Not the mask, but the mirror. In that sense, the unraveling isn't the end. It's the beginning of something vast, The individual dissolves into the infinite. The name dissolves, but the note remains, subtle, eternal, echoing not in space, but in awareness. Still, we fear it, because we are addicted to selfhood, addicted to the idea of being the main character in a narrative we never fully wrote. But narratives are illusions stitched together by memory. Strip them away, and what's left might be terrifying or liberating. Sometimes, the deepest part of you, the observer, survives the unraveling, detached from thought, silent, watching the threads fall away without flinching. That part doesn't fear dissolution. It was never stitched in the first place. It simply is. So, maybe identity isn't meant to last forever. Maybe it's a temporary braid meant to be untangled so that something purer can emerge, like a cocoon unraveling to reveal wings, like silence retaking a song. And maybe, just maybe, you're unraveling right now. Not because you're broken, but because something beyond you is trying to remember what you were before you became this name, this face, this fragile arrangement of stitched together moments. You are the thread and the unraveling, the silence and the story, the end, and the one who watches it. The reverse memory, bloom. What if death isn't deletion, but duplication? What if when your consciousness dissolves, your memories don't simply scatter into nothingness, but instead recoil, like seeds pressed too hard into the soil, bursting open in some strange new soil of existence? This is the haunting essence of what some call the reverse memory bloom, a theory that suggests your past, rather than fading, might echo back into reality, in fractured loops, recurring events, or parallel minds you'll never meet. Imagine you're walking through a place you've never been, and yet it feels familiar. You know where the broken step is before you see it. You recognize the peeling paint on a door you've never touched. These aren't just déjà vu. They're fragments, echoes perhaps, of a life that's rerouted itself somewhere outside your current continuity. Maybe your memory didn't die. Maybe it escaped. In neuroscience, there's evidence that memories are not static recordings. They're fluid, rewritable, and, most mysteriously, contagious. The memory transfer phenomenon in rats, where RNA from a conditioned animal was injected into another, caused the second rat to react as if it had lived the same experience. This implies memory may be more than just neural pathways. It may be a pattern that can re-emerge elsewhere if conditions are right. Now, scale that up. What if memory doesn't just reappear biologically, but cosmically? There's a principle in quantum mechanics called information preservation. It suggests that even in black holes, where everything seems to be obliterated, the information, the quantum blueprint of what fell in, cannot be destroyed. If this is true at the fabric of reality, then your existence, your memories, your story, may leave behind fingerprints that cannot be erased. They might reassemble, not linearly, but as bursts in someone else's dream, a stranger's instinct, or even a parallel version of yourself, waking up with a different name, but the same inexplicable fear of drowning in a bathtub, just like you had at age 5. And what about dreams? Have you ever had one so vivid that it felt more true than your waking life? Full of people you knew deeply, places that didn't exist here, but that you could navigate with your eyes closed? Could these dreams be intrusions from your past self echoing forward, or your memory finding a new vessel to bloom in across dimensions? Many cultures have long believed in reincarnation. But what if reincarnation isn't about the soul migrating, but the memory doing so? Think of a person born with inexplicable phobias, talents, or instincts. A child who knows a language they were never taught. Are these quirks? Are these neurological glitches? Or are they fractures of a looped memory finding fertile ground again? In psychology, cryptomnesia occurs when someone recalls a memory without recognizing it as such, believing it to be a new, original thought. Now, consider that happening not within one life, but between them. An author in 2093 writes a story almost identical to your life, line for line, without knowing you ever existed. Did she copy your life, or did your memory bloom again through her fingers? This would explain the feeling some people get that they're living the same life over and over, not like a reincarnated spirit, but like a broken record of memory skipping in places. The reverse memory bloom suggests that even if your body dies, your mental imprint might linger, not as a ghost, but as a rebroadcast. Reality could be a giant field of consciousness where memories, Once unanchored, try to reroute. And not all blooms are beautiful. Trauma could replay in others. Cycles of violence, fear, or heartbreak might pulse outward like aftershocks. A child wakes screaming from nightmares they can't explain. A soldier lives with panic attacks from wars that never happened in their lifetime. Maybe these aren't theirs. Maybe the echoes are crawling through reality's cracks, searching for anyone with a compatible mind. There's also evidence that the brain creates simulations, predictive models, of potential futures based on memories. But what if these models are not contained in one head? What if your mind is like a prism, bending memory light from another you, one that's long gone or never quite existed? The reverse memory bloom isn't just about memories surviving. It's about memories spreading, like spores riding invisible winds across minds, lives, and timelines. Your laughter, your pain, your final thoughts, they may be blooming now in someone else's silent moment, when they don't know why they feel like crying under a blue sky that looks exactly like one you watched on your last good day. We often think of memory as past tense, as a library we leave behind, but perhaps it's a seed library, meant to be scattered. Perhaps our lives are only partially contained in flesh, and partially embedded in the fabric of space-time itself. When you die, your consciousness may not reawaken, but the memories may do what wild things do when set free. They grow again, but never quite the same. And maybe that's the point. Maybe your death isn't the end of your story, but the explosion of its scattered chapters across a dozen new books. Books that don't carry your name. Books that aren't even books. Just dreams, instincts, déjà vu. Or maybe just a moment in a stranger's life where they pause, feel something they can't explain, and whisper, "I've been here before." That's the reverse memory bloom. Not reincarnation, not heaven, not haunting, but something stranger, softer, and far more quietly terrifying. Your past might outlive you not by being remembered, but by forgetting who it belonged to. The afterimage soul effect. What happens when the body dies, but something stays behind, lingering like light after it's gone? The afterimage soul effect suggests that a piece of you doesn't vanish with your final breath. Instead, it leaves a residue, a kind of metaphysical imprint scorched into the hidden layers of reality, like staring at the sun too long and still seeing it after your eyes close. Even after your atoms scatter and your name is forgotten, something about you might continue to echo, faintly, endlessly. We often think of the soul as an all-or-nothing entity. You either have one or you don't. But what if the soul isn't a solid, indivisible essence, but more like a light field, diffuse, radiant, decaying slowly across unseen frequencies of the universe? In physics, there's a phenomenon called persistence of vision. A bright image, like a camera flash or the sun, creates an afterimage burned temporarily into your visual system. But what if consciousness does the same thing to reality? Think of the moments when a room still feels occupied after someone has left it, when their warmth lingers on a chair, when their scent clings to the air. These sensations fade, but they don't vanish instantly. Now stretch that idea out. What if, beyond the physical senses, reality itself retains a kind of spiritual afterglow? A place where every soul that has ever passed still hums faintly, like the last vibration of a plucked string. Science is only beginning to scratch at this. Quantum entanglement has shown us that particles, once linked, can influence one another across vast distances. Memory, too, operates with strange fidelity, sometimes recalling what should be lost. There are places on Earth, like ancient battlefields or abandoned homes, where people claim to feel something that's hard to describe. These aren't ghosts in the horror movie sense. These are impressions, imprints, etched into the fabric of space and time, not because of fear, because of presence. Culturally, the idea appears everywhere. In Tibetan Buddhism, the concept of the bardo suggests that the soul enters a transitional state after death, echoing through various realities before finding a new form. In certain African traditions, the ancestors are never fully gone. They exist in a space between worlds, influencing the living subtly, like the undertow beneath a calm surface. These are all versions of the same intuition, that death does not erase, it stains. And then there are near-death experiences. People clinically dead for minutes, no heartbeat, no brain activity, return with vivid memories, profound feelings, and often irreversible life changes. The skeptics say it's the brain's final fireworks. But what if it's more? What if, in that moment of clinical death, the soul begins to burn its last light into existence, leaving behind a flare the universe can't ignore? Even dreams might be part of this effect. How often do you dream of people long gone, not in surreal or distorted forms, but exactly as they were, with voices intact, with mannerisms preserved? These aren't hallucinations. They might be echoes your soul is still attuned to, tuning forks resonating from across the veil. What if the brain isn't generating them, but receiving them? We also see this in art, in legacy, in story. Why do some names live on forever? Shakespeare, Rumi, Frida Kahlo. Their bodies are dust, but their essence radiates forward. That's not just cultural memory, it's resonance. They impress themselves so vividly into human consciousness that their soul's afterimage continues to shine. Even obscure people, mothers, mentors, strangers who showed a moment of kindness, leave ripples in us, invisible but real. Technology is catching up. Algorithms now simulate dead celebrities. AI recreates voices, facial movements, personalities. We are, in effect, building digital afterimages, but no code, no pixel can truly contain the warmth of the real presence. It can only hint at what remains when the body is gone, the afterglow of soul. But here's the most beautiful, haunting part of the afterimage soul effect. It means you may never fully disappear. Even if you're never famous, even if your grave is unmarked and your name unspoken, your existence mattered. You bent the world. You warmed a chair. You made someone laugh. You shaped a decision. Helped a stranger. Broke a heart. Taught a lesson. You sent out waves that may still be traveling, through people, through matter, through something science hasn't named yet. Your soul might not float upward into the clouds, harp in hand. It might dissolve into frequencies, into pulses too soft for instruments to catch, but not too soft to be felt by someone, somewhere. That ache in the chest, that sudden memory, that breeze through a window at the perfect moment. It could be your afterimage, flickering still. So live in such a way that you leave something behind, not just possessions, not just data, but pressure on the world's fabric. Be so alive that reality remembers you after you're gone, because you may fade, but the imprint remains. You may dissolve, but the light you cast could linger, on skin, in dreams, in time itself. Because maybe in the deepest structure of the cosmos, nothing is ever fully lost. Only transformed, only translated, only dimmed, like the glow that lingers after the sun has set. The final echo chamber. What if death isn't silence, but echo? Not a peaceful drift into nothing, but a resonant chamber where your final thoughts, your last flash of awareness, don't fade, but repeat, loop, reverberate. Not for seconds, but potentially forever. This is the concept behind the final echo chamber. A theory that dares to suggest that consciousness doesn't vanish the moment the brain shuts down. Instead, it becomes trapped inside a collapsing mental space, like a voice calling out in a canyon with no exit. And the canyon is you. Let's begin where science and mystery touch, the dying brain. Research on near-death experiences has revealed something strange. In the moments before death, many people report a sudden surge of clarity, vivid memories, bright light, a sensation of leaving the body, sometimes even entire life reviews compressed into seconds. Neurologically, this is matched by a burst of gamma wave activity in the brain, a final flare before the system shuts down. But here's the twist. In this brief window, time perception breaks. The mind is no longer anchored to linear progression. Seconds stretch. Microseconds become entire scenes. In those final instants, your brain, starved of oxygen but flooded with neurotransmitters, might simulate vast spans of thought, a lifetime, a conversation, a whole imagined world. Now apply the echo chamber theory. What if that final surge doesn't just stretch, but loops? What if the collapse of neural activity folds back on itself, trapping your final conscious state in a recursive pattern, like a song caught in the last groove of a broken record? The physical body dies, but in that tiny slice of collapsing awareness, you don't know that yet. You're still thinking, remembering, feeling, and as oxygen fails, your brain enters a kind of closed circuit, where new input is gone, but existing thoughts cycle endlessly. It's not heaven or hell. It's the last thing you were thinking, played back forever. This isn't reincarnation. It's not an afterlife in the religious sense. It's cognitive entrapment, a loop of you inside you. Examples exist, oddly, in computational systems. Consider software in a memory loop. When code fails, but the loop isn't interrupted, it cycles indefinitely. No new output, just internal repetition. It consumes resources until the system collapses. But if the system is trapped outside of time, like the dying brain might be in its final surge, there's no collapse. There's just repetition. And now, consider this. Many people describe the moments before unconsciousness, whether through trauma, anesthesia, or fainting, as deeply strange. Time elongates, events distort, emotions intensify. A single thought can feel eternal. Now imagine that thought is your last, a goodbye, a regret, a memory of someone's face, a question you never answered. And that moment doesn't pass. It echoes. Because with the brain's usual systems offline, there's no way to move forward. There's no forward at all. Just mental feedback, trapped in your own private eternity. This is the final echo chamber, a cognitive singularity. And it might already be happening, countless times each day. Every death could spawn one. Billions of tiny, recursive minds echoing their last impressions. Not in physical space, but in some residual field of thought. Some scientists speculate that consciousness might not need a full brain to exist. It might emerge from patterns, and patterns can linger, like sound in a sealed room. One metaphor? Think of an old bell tower. The bell has stopped moving, but the air still carries the hum, a long, fading note. You don't need the bell anymore to hear the echo, and maybe your brain is that bell. So here's the question that chills the spine. What will be your final echo? Because you may be living inside it, far longer than you lived at all. Is it peace, love, regret, or fear, confusion, panic? In this theory, death isn't darkness. It's a mirror, trapping your final signal and reflecting it back forever, not to others, but to yourself. And the only way out? Maybe never. So when you next lie awake, thoughts circling your mind, consider this. Those loops you fall into now, those ruminations, regrets, and memories, might be practice runs. Your brain learning how to echo, because at the end, the loop may close, and you'll live in whatever you last thought. Not as a soul, not as a person, but as a pure echo. The forgotten mirror law: there is a mirror, somewhere, covered in dust, tucked behind furniture, hanging in a house no one lives in anymore. And if someone were to wipe it clean and look into it, they might see more than just their own face. They might see you, not the you of now. The you of then, frozen mid-blink or half smiling, staring back with a look even you've forgotten how to make. This is the forgotten mirror law, the idea that reflections don't vanish. They stay. They linger. Somewhere in places where no one is watching, those old mirrors hold images of us. Not as memories, not as photographs, but as preserved impressions of consciousness. Echoes of identity suspended in glass. It's easy to laugh this off. After all, we think of mirrors as blank surfaces, always reactive, never storing. But is that really true? Quantum physics has already shown us that observation changes reality, that particles behave differently when they're watched. So, what if mirrors, those timeless watchers, do more than reflect? What if they record? Imagine every mirror you've ever looked into. Bathroom mirrors at midnight, cracked ones in abandoned gas stations, the glossy black of a train window, the silvered glass in your childhood bedroom. Each one could be a vault, a silent archivist, holding on to some sliver of who you were when you faced it. We believe memories live in the brain, but memories are faulty, rewritten, overwritten, lost. Mirrors, though, don't have emotions. They don't distort. They don't forget. If they do remember, they remember exactly. What if, at some fundamental level, a mirror isn't passive? What if it's an interface, a bridge, between perception and reality? Think about haunted houses. Legends often speak of mirrors covered after death, not just for superstition, but to stop the soul from being trapped. Why that belief? Why mirrors? Perhaps something ancient in us knows they hold more than we understand. That when a person dies, their reflection might linger, not just metaphorically, but genuinely, still glimmering in the last mirror they faced. You've probably caught glimpses before. That feeling when you pass a mirror and think you saw movement, but it was delayed, or the sense that your reflection hesitated before copying you. The way a mirror sometimes feels too deep, like it's not just a surface, but a window. And maybe it is. Perhaps these echoes accumulate. Perhaps mirrors are filled with layers, like sediment, of all the lives they have ever reflected. In a family home passed down for generations, the bathroom mirror may contain the flickers of 5 or 6 lifetimes. Maybe when a child looks into it, they don't just see themselves. Maybe they see pieces of people they've never met, but are connected to through blood and time. This law also asks another, more terrifying question. If the mirror holds a part of you, can something look back? Could your past self still linger, still conscious in some suspended form, hoping, aching, for a gaze to return? Maybe the person you used to be, at age 6 or 16 or 28, still exists there, unaware that time has moved on, trapped in a visual echo. That old version of you, frozen in the moment it last saw the world. And what if, one day, that image looks into your eyes, not to reflect, but to plead, remember me. Don't let me fade. There are cultures that believe mirrors should be removed from the room of the dying, that the soul could become confused and enter the reflection instead of leaving peacefully. If that's superstition, it's a strange one repeated globally, across continents and centuries. Why would that myth echo across humanity? Unless we've always sensed that mirrors don't just reflect life, they anchor it. In a more psychological sense, mirrors have always played a role in self-recognition. A baby first realizes it is someone when it sees itself in the mirror. That moment, primal, electric, is the foundation of identity. But what if it's more than metaphor? What if the mirror doesn't just help you recognize yourself? It helps the world recognize you. And what happens if you stop looking? If the mirrors you once knew gather dust, do those versions of you fade? Or do they remain, trapped in time, like paused video frames waiting to be resumed? The forgotten mirror law implies that your relationship with your reflection never truly ends. That no version of you is ever fully gone, just waiting behind glass, hoping for attention. Now imagine walking into a long-abandoned house. Sunlight cuts through cracks in the walls. Dust floats in the air like memory. You find a mirror. You wipe it clean. And for a split second, before your current face snaps into view, you see someone else. And somehow, heartbreakingly, you know it's you. A past version of you. One who still doesn't know what's coming. One who still believes in something you've since buried. That flash may last only a moment, but in that moment you realize mirrors might not forget you, even when the world does. And maybe that's a kind of immortality. Not one made of grand statues or written names, but of silent watchers. Of reflections tucked away in glass and shadow, waiting patiently. Not for fame, not for glory, but just for someone to look back and remember. The misaligned timeline theory. What if death isn't the end, but just a misplaced footstep? One that lands not in darkness, but in a version of time that doesn't quite match the one you left behind. You blink, and everything looks the same. The sky, the people, your reflection in the mirror. But something is off. A beat behind. A thread misaligned. This is the misaligned timeline theory. You might not know you died. You might not remember what came before. But suddenly you're living in a world where things feel like echoes. A song sounds familiar, but the lyrics are wrong. A childhood photo is missing someone you swear was there. A scar you remember fades without a trace. It's not déjà vu, it's misplacement. A staggered continuity. You've stepped from one reality into another, carrying just enough of yourself to believe you're still home. The theory finds root in strange reports. People who narrowly escaped fatal accidents, only to say they felt a moment of stillness, a flash of impossible clarity, a hum behind their eyes. And then, they survived, but changed. They remember events differently. They recognize people who swear they've never met. They feel emotions they can't place, like mourning someone they never lost, or losing something they never had. Science tells us that time isn't linear. It's a dimension like space, malleable, bent by gravity, emotion, and perception. Quantum physics allows for the superposition of states, particles existing in multiple outcomes until observed. What if consciousness works the same way? What if the version of you that dies here doesn't collapse into nothing, but instead continues in a timeline where the fatal event never quite happened? Not reincarnation, not resurrection. Just a shift, like stepping between pages of a book that were bound slightly out of order. You think you're on chapter 20, but you're not. You're in an alternate draft, and only small glitches remain to hint that something changed. It's subtle. That's the terrifying part. You don't wake up in a new body. You don't suddenly gain powers or start glowing. You just feel estranged. The people in your life behave differently. Their temperaments shifted ever so slightly. The conversations don't unfold how they used to. You find yourself responding to arguments before they happen, or misremembering how old your pet is. Your memories argue with the world around you, but no one else notices the contradiction. And if you mention it, they say you're tired, stressed, dreaming too vividly. Maybe you are. Or maybe you didn't survive that crash. Maybe you slipped, gracefully, invisibly, into a timeline that kept going without missing a beat, and your mind just filled in the blank. There's comfort in the idea, a poetic mercy woven into the architecture of reality, a fail-safe. When your thread snaps, another catches it. You live on, not by beating death, but by avoiding the version of it that finished you. But there's also horror. If this happens once, why not twice, 10 times, 1,000? What if your timeline has been patched together so many times that you're walking a Frankenstein path of spliced fates, each one almost right, but never quite home? What if that's what déjà vu really is? Your mind recognizing a moment you already lived, just not here. This theory has unsettling implications. It suggests there may be no fixed you, just drifting continuities of self strung along countless variant timelines. Some of those versions die, some live, some merge, if only for a second. The thread of identity becomes less like a rope and more like a river delta, branching infinitely, converging rarely, but always moving. And the deepest fear? You might never notice when it happens again. You'll be brushing your teeth, driving home, looking into someone's eyes, and you'll feel it. The faint vertigo of a life slightly misaligned, a joke that lands too early, a shadow where light should be, a clock ticking in the wrong tempo. The truth? We may already be doing this all the time. Maybe death isn't the end. Maybe it's the moment you're edited out of one scene and quietly pasted into another. The camera keeps rolling, no one calls cut, and somewhere, the original version of you slips into stillness, unaware that the next take is already in motion. That's the haunting beauty of the misaligned timeline theory. You survive, but the world you wake into isn't the one that mourned you. It's the one that forgot you were ever gone. The persistence drift. What if death isn't the vanishing of the self, but the scattering of it? Long after your body stops breathing, small fragments of you persist. Not in marble statues or digital archives, but in more subtle, haunting ways. In the way someone laughs because you once made them. In the words that echo years later, in a mind that barely knew you, in the habits someone mimicked without realizing. This is the persistence drift, the slow, invisible migration of your inner life into the minds and actions of others. You are not a sealed container. You are porous. Every conversation leaks pieces of your mind into someone else's. Every gesture, every reaction, every time you reached for someone in pain or recoiled in fear, you taught them something, even if they didn't notice. Your tone of voice in an argument might reappear decades later in the way someone disciplines their child. A phrase you loved might become a family's inside joke long after anyone remembers where it came from. We often measure legacy by fame or achievement, but real persistence, real afterlife, might be quieter. It's in the drift. You might have once comforted a friend during their worst night. That friend later comforts a stranger in the same way, using your words, your manner. And then that stranger does it again years later, and again. The chain doesn't carry your name, but it carries your rhythm, your kindness, your vocabulary of comfort. In psychology, mirror neurons explain how we subconsciously imitate the actions and emotions of others. Your sigh, your nervous laugh, your habit of tapping your foot when thinking, those are absorbed by others, sometimes permanently. We wear each other like borrowed coats without ever knowing the original tailor. That twitch in someone's eye before they cry, maybe it started with you. Think about music. A melody enters your mind. You hum it. Someone hears and carries it onward. Now, imagine your behavior, your thoughts, your quirks. Doing the same, subconsciously replicated, modified, drifted. Maybe not even by those who knew you directly. Someone you spoke to once in passing might have picked up your cadence and shared it with someone else, who then shared it with someone else. A viral pattern of the soul. This is more than poetic theory. Linguistics shows us how certain dialects shift because of single influential individuals, teachers, performers, or charismatic leaders. But influence doesn't stop at language. The way someone ties their shoelaces or says before a sentence might trace back generations. You might be living pieces of people who died centuries ago, and others might carry pieces of you for centuries forward. Even in dreams, a story you once told, a horror you lived, a fantasy you whispered into the ear of a lover, may return, mutated, in someone else's dream. Maybe a child somewhere dreams of a forest you once loved but never described. Maybe the way they move through it mirrors how you used to walk. How does that happen? No one knows. But dreams are recycling factories. Consciousness leaks. Ideas drift. And trauma too drifts. This theory doesn't only honor the beautiful parts of you, it also recognizes that your darker parts, your rage, your fears, your avoidances, can also echo. Children mimic the silence of their parents' sadness. Generations inherit patterns not in blood, but in behavior. You don't need to know your grandfather to walk like him. And love? Love is perhaps the strongest persistence agent of all. To love someone deeply is to carry part of them forward. You quote them, defend their memory, replay their jokes, argue with them in your mind even after they're gone. You become their living archive. And then you are loved, and you are archived in someone else. Imagine then a network, not of data, but of lived moments, habits, gestures, fears, laughs, a web stretching across time, every life passing through others, altering their course subtly but irreversibly. This isn't metaphor, it's entropy in reverse. Instead of disorder growing, small patterns persist, not untouched, but recognizably you. Maybe that's why some people feel haunted, not by ghosts, but by gestures. A lover's smile reminds you of your mother's smirk. A stranger's nod matches your old friend's exact rhythm. You're not being followed, you're recognizing the drift. The invisible ways people leak into people. And perhaps, in the end, you never fully die. Not because someone remembers your name, but because parts of you refuse to disappear. The persistence drift is your immortality, not carved in stone, but passed hand to hand, voice to voice, life to life. Until one day, someone says something they believe is theirs, but it's yours. The shattered film effect. Imagine a film reel, your life, playing smoothly from beginning to end. Each moment a frame, each memory a scene. But when you die, the projector doesn't just shut off. Instead, the reel shatters. Pieces fly in different directions. Some get stuck on repeat, others distort. Some vanish entirely. This is the shattered film effect. Death doesn't stop your story. It fractures it into countless versions, each looped and edited inside the mind of those who remember you. Think about how you remember someone who's gone. It's not chronological. It's not even coherent. It's scattered. You recall their smile during a holiday 10 years ago, a fight you had, the sound of their voice when they said something ordinary that became profound only in hindsight. These fragments aren't stored in one place. They're scattered like shards of broken glass across your life. Each time you pick one up, you cut yourself a little, on grief, on nostalgia, on memory. And your version isn't the only one. Every person who knew them has their own fractured reel. For one, they were a friend. For another, a parent. For someone else, a rival, a stranger, a fleeting smile in a hallway. These versions are often incompatible, even contradictory, but they're all true in their own broken way. After death, no one remains whole. They become many stories, some tender, some bitter, some misunderstood. This isn't just metaphor. It's backed by neuroscience. Memory doesn't preserve, it reconstructs. Each recall is a rebuild, vulnerable to emotion, time, and suggestion. The more you revisit a memory, the more it changes. You're not watching a recording, you're creating a remix. And when someone dies, there's no new data, no correction, just an ever-mutating reel looping endlessly in the shadows of your mind. It gets even stranger. Some people become saints after death. Others are villainized. Entire legacies are built from fragments. A parent who was cruel becomes wise in the retelling. A friend who disappointed you becomes a symbol of innocence. Death creates a vacuum, and we fill it with narrative. Not because we lie, but because we need coherence. We need endings that make sense, even if the truth was jagged. This is why eulogies often feel like fiction. They are stories told with intention, to comfort, to honor, to control the chaos. But behind the words lie the real reels, messy, overlapping, emotionally raw. And that's okay, because the truth isn't just what happened. It's also how it's remembered. There's a haunting beauty in this. You don't belong to yourself after death. You become community property, shared across thousands of reels. In one memory, you're kind. In another, cruel. In another, barely there. You echo differently in every mind, looped and replayed, distorted by love, hate, guilt, or longing. Like light through stained glass, you become many-colored after you break. Artists and writers have touched on this intuitively. In literature, characters often live on in the imagination of others, shaped and reshaped by grief. Films capture this by showing the same scene from different perspectives, none entirely correct. The Japanese film Rashomon built its entire narrative on this truth. Memory is fractured, truth is plural. So too is the memory of you. The shattered film effect also explains why grief is nonlinear. One moment, you're laughing at a joyful memory. The next, you're drowning in sadness over a forgotten detail. The real is never stable. It skips, jumps, melts under heat, snaps unexpectedly. Time cannot glue it back together. And why should it? Maybe we were never meant to preserve the dead in one piece, but to carry their pieces as mirrors, reflecting who we are, what we needed, what we feared. And here's the paradox. You're doing it too, right now. With every person who's gone from your life, you are the projector, the editor, the audience. You decide which scenes to replay, which to cut, which to freeze in golden light. You are scripting their afterlife, whether you realize it or not. The dead live on not just in memory, but in interpretation, in bias, in emotional residue. History itself is a museum of shattered reels. We remember figures like Cleopatra, Tesla, or Van Gogh not as they truly were, but as incomplete collages. Bits passed down, reinterpreted through art, myth, admiration, or criticism. Tesla, once buried in obscurity, was reborn as a symbol of visionary genius. Van Gogh, once deemed mad and unwanted, now defines entire movements in color and emotion. These reconstructions are not lies. They are echoes refracted through need and time. Even within families, the same person becomes many people. A grandmother might be remembered as nurturing by one grandchild and stern by another. A father might be a protector in one child's memory and a source of pain in another's. The real is shaped by perspective. No one gets the whole story, not even the person living it. This is why the self, too, is a kind of fiction, revised daily, especially in the minds of others after we're gone. There is something liberating in this multiplicity. You don't have to be one thing forever. You don't need to fear being misunderstood, because the truth is, you will be. But that misunderstanding is part of the tapestry, part of the shimmer of human memory. You may be flawed in one reel and heroic in another. You may disappoint in one and save in the next. The versions multiply, and from that fractured glow, something real emerges. Not accuracy, but meaning. So tell your story while you can, not to control the narrative, but to scatter more film across more minds, to plant scenes that loop long after you're gone. And if your reel shatters, good. That's how light breaks into rainbows. Because in those millions of loops, you're never entirely gone. One version of you might comfort a grieving friend. Another might haunt someone who wronged you. Another might inspire a stranger who never met you, but heard about something you once said. You're a constellation of echoes now. Your reel is broken, but its light still flickers in the darkened rooms of other minds. And sometimes, that flicker is enough to light someone else's next scene. The stolen continuity theory. What if death is not the end of your story, but the quiet donation of your unfinished life to someone else? The stolen continuity theory suggests a haunting possibility. When you die, the versions of your life you never got to live don't vanish. They are rerouted. The paths you didn't walk, the the choices you couldn't make, the futures you abandoned. They might not collapse into nothing. Instead, they drift across the seams of reality, looking for a host. Someone else, somewhere, sometime, steps unknowingly into the continuity you left behind. Imagine a woman named Clara who dies in her sleep at 87. In another city, a child named Ren begins to have recurring dreams about a career in astronomy, a field no one in his family has ever touched. He begins building telescopes out of scraps, obsessed with starlight. Clara, in her youth, had once dreamed of becoming an astronomer before war and survival changed her trajectory. She died never knowing the stars through a lens, but Ren picks up where her life forked and doesn't even know it. Could this be just coincidence, or could existence itself refuse to waste potential? Some physicists already entertain the idea that all possible outcomes do occur, just in different branches of reality. But what if, rather than infinite parallel universes, potential futures are recycled, distributed like unclaimed inheritance? Instead of vanishing with you, unused versions of your timeline are embedded in the universal memory, waiting to be reassigned. In that sense, death becomes a transfer, a quiet redistribution of unrealized lives. The implications go beyond mere reincarnation. This isn't your soul migrating or karma unfolding, it's structural, a kind of cosmic economy of continuity. You don't just die, you leave behind the momentum of what could have been, and the universe, too precise to waste such inertia, weaves it into someone else's path. They might never notice, they might just feel a strange pull, a quiet echo, but they step forward carrying your shadow future like a second spine. There are real-world cases that make you pause. A woman in Brazil writes symphonies without ever studying music. A boy in Japan builds ancient Scandinavian ships from memory. Cases of prodigies, obsessions, or even phobias that seem too surgically specific to come from environment or chance. Are these stolen continuities? Is someone else's unlived life bleeding through? And it's not always beautiful. Someone might inherit not just your dreams, but your regrets, your unfinished business, your need to forgive. The stolen continuity theory doesn't claim to be poetic, it claims to be relentless. A mechanism that ensures no possibility goes wasted, even if the vessel changes. Philosophically, it challenges what we think life is. We often believe identity ends at the boundary of our mind, our body. But if continuity can move, if futures can be stolen, rerouted, or absorbed, then the self becomes less of a container and more of a current, something you carry, but also something you can receive. Think of a theater. You rehearse a play you'll never perform. You die, the script doesn't burn, it's handed off. Someone else takes the stage with your lines still echoing in the wings. Maybe they change the ending. Maybe they redeem the arc you couldn't. Maybe they never know you were the one who wrote the first act. Some theorists connect this to collective consciousness, the idea that all minds are tributaries feeding a single vast ocean of awareness. In that case, stolen continuities aren't theft at all. They're a form of return, a rebalancing. You didn't lose your life. You gave it to someone who needed that momentum to climb out of a spiral you yourself had once fallen into. Or maybe it's even more personal than that. Maybe the person who inherits your future is another version of you, a close fork, a you who chose differently at a key moment. And when your version collapses, that parallel you gains the fuel of your choices, your timelines, like extra lifeblood. Suddenly they become unstoppable, not because they're special, but because you unknowingly became their reinforcement. You died, but you became the reason someone else didn't quit. So what does this mean for the living? It means you may not be entirely alone in your ambitions. The voice pushing you forward might not just be your own. It could be an echo, a handoff, a ghost of an unrealized life now blooming through you. That strange talent you never practiced. That hunger you can't explain. The vivid dream you swear wasn't yours. Maybe they aren't. Maybe they're borrowed and sacred. It also means what you don't do still matters. The life you almost lived doesn't dissolve in regret. It transforms into legacy, even if anonymously. Your unlived futures have weight. Your silent wishes might become someone's guiding voice. You don't vanish. You redistribute. And somewhere out there, someone might be walking toward a destiny you unknowingly passed on, because you couldn't or wouldn't or didn't get the chance. That's the haunting beauty of the stolen continuity theory. Even in death, you may never truly disappear. Your potential futures are seeds, scattered into the souls of strangers, and they grow, quietly, unknowingly, endlessly. The recursive breath loop. Take a deep breath. Now imagine that breath never truly leaves you, that when you exhale, it doesn't simply vanish into air. It begins a journey, one far stranger and more beautiful than we've ever imagined. This is the recursive breath loop. The idea that every breath we take and every breath we give away enters a loop far older than humanity, one that stretches across time, space, and species. Your last breath, the one you will someday surrender, may not be an ending. It may be a return. That final exhalation might spiral outward, curling through invisible atmospheric tides, caught in thermals, carried into oceans, absorbed into plants, broken apart by sunlight, reshaped in chloroplasts, exhaled by leaves, and drawn back in, again, not by you, but by something or someone else. What if, at a molecular level, we are already breathing pieces of each other, of history, of lives long extinguished? There are trillions of molecules in a single breath. Scientists estimate that any given breath you take contains atoms once inhaled by Caesar, Cleopatra, Buddha, a plague survivor, a jazz musician, a forgotten child from a burned city. Every exhale you release contributes to the reservoir of the living and the yet to be born. But the recursive breath loop suggests it goes even deeper than recycling. It suggests something intentional in the chaos, a pattern, not just repetition, a breath that doesn't just drift, but curls, returns, re-emerges, not randomly but with a strange poetic logic. Think of ancient forests. Every tree exhales oxygen from the carbon dioxide you release. Your breath feeds the woods, but then those woods decay, release spores, and grow fungi that feed animals. Animals that exhale what the fungi inhale, and round it goes. Now, imagine your final breath, the one drawn in the last second of your life, never truly leaves the system. That the very molecules that left your lungs go on a cosmic voyage, crossing borders and epochs, until someday, a creature you've never seen, a dolphin in a distant ocean, a child in a desert village, or even something not yet evolved, draws that molecule in again. They breathe you, not metaphorically, literally. And maybe there's something in that breath, some quantum entanglement, some subtle information structure that carries the tiniest echo of you, not your memory, not your mind, but your rhythm, your awe, your fear, your wonder. A faint vibration encoded in carbon and oxygen. A recursive pattern not entirely lost. It's not reincarnation. It's respiration made holy. A cycle of exchange so intimate and vast that individuality becomes irrelevant. You're not just yourself. You're part of the breath loop of life itself. One inhale among billions. One exhale feeding worlds. And this loop isn't limited to Earth. If one day we colonize other planets, terraform worlds, release stored oxygen, melt frozen ice, and begin the cycle anew, then your breath might travel farther than you ever did in life. Your final molecules might curl into the lungs of Martian children, of alien plants, of post-human symbiotes on distant moons. Your breath could become part of weather systems in terraformed atmospheres, raining down in alien storms, rising in alien heat, returning in alien size. It raises haunting questions. Is breath identity? Are we still ourselves if pieces of our physical exhalation persist in others? Are we ghosts that breathe through lungs not our own? Is humanity a single organism breathing through 8 billion mouths at once? Maybe that's why moments of collective breath, chants, rituals, prayer, laughter, singing, feel so sacred. Maybe that's why the first breath of a newborn feels miraculous, and the last breath of a loved one feels like a theft, because some part of us knows breath isn't just chemistry, it's communion. It also means you've never taken a pure breath in your life. Every inhale has history, every breath carries the dust of burning stars, the spores of prehistoric ferns, the breath of dinosaurs, soldiers, poets, whales, prisoners, prophets. You are made of breaths recycled through every age of the earth, and perhaps through other worlds too. And it doesn't stop when you die. Your lungs will stop, but your breath won't. It will curl into the world, scatter, mingle, reform. It might spend years in deep ocean currents. It might freeze into glaciers or bake into desert heat. It might slip into seeds, rise in pollen, or drift in twilight winds above cities you never saw. Eventually, someone will breathe it in again. And maybe, just maybe, in some impossible future, one where science, time, and spirit blur, someone might feel something strange, a flicker, a whisper in the breath, not a word, not a memory, just a sense that they're not breathing alone. The thought fossil theory. Long after you've left a room, a city, or a lifetime, something of you might remain. Not in photos, not in tombstones, but buried deep within the soft layers of other people's minds, like fossils. Not bones, but thoughts, glances, half-remembered laughter. This is the thought fossil theory. The theory proposes that our existence leaves behind cognitive imprints, micro-traces of self that linger in the subconscious minds of those we meet. You may be forgotten, but not fully. Pieces of you embed themselves into the mental sediment of others, preserved by moments so small you never thought they mattered. A stranger once saw you helping someone pick up spilled groceries on a rainy day. Years later, they remember that kindness without recalling your face. A classmate recalls the way you tapped your pencil during exams. An ex still hears the way you whispered their name in the dark, even if they don't say it out loud. These are your thought fossils. They are fragments, nonverbal, unconscious, emotional, and they accumulate, layer after layer. They don't form a complete you, but like ancient fossils, they suggest a creature once walked here, a presence, a shape, a force that pressed into the fabric of someone else's life and then vanished. Cognitive science supports this. Humans retain far more than we consciously recall. Implicit memory, unconscious retention of past experiences, shapes our instincts, preferences, and gut reactions. You may not remember a conversation, but the way it made you feel lingers in your decision-making. People forget your name, but not the safety or dread you made them feel, and because of this, your influence can echo long past your goodbye. Even someone who only knew you for minutes might carry a fossil of you. A story you once told might change how they treat their child. A cruel word you muttered might become the reason they avoid a certain song. A look of compassion might be why they didn't give up that night. These effects ripple quietly, like buried bones shaping the terrain above them. You might think you're forgotten, but forgetting is never absolute. Just as fossils don't shout but still testify, your tiniest acts leave residue in neural pathways, in dreams, in split-second decisions. You are woven into others' patterns, whether you know it or not. Now, imagine this. As you move through the world, you're not just collecting memories, you're shedding fossils. With every glance, smile, sigh, you leave microprints. Invisible, yes, but lasting. And these microprints embed in people who embed in others. You echo through strangers you'll never meet, and here lies the haunting beauty. One day when your name is gone, when your grave is unvisited and your photos are dust, someone may still pause before shouting at a waiter because a fossil of your patience, once seen, whispers to them. Someone may hum a tune you used to love without knowing why. A child might laugh in a way that sounds like yours because their father once sat near you on a train and heard it, and it sank into him like sediment. These are not legacies in the grand sense. They're not fame or monuments. They're quieter than memory, more delicate than legacy, but more permanent than either. Because thoughts are not confined to the conscious mind. The subconscious is vast, an ocean of unknowable impressions, and in it, you might be eternal. But here's the paradox. You'll never know how many fossils you've left. You'll never see the full shape they form. You'll never meet the future selves they influence. The fossils are blind and silent, but they live on, buried in laughter, tone, posture, instinct. This idea can bring comfort, but it can also bring weight, because it means everything matters. Every word, every kindness, every wound you cause, every shrug or smile may fossilize in someone else's psyche. You are always shaping, always sculpting the minds around you, whether you intend to or not. So, if your greatest fear is being forgotten, understand this. Your full name may vanish, your voice may fade, but fossils don't need names. They just need presence. And presence, real, vulnerable presence, is more enduring than you think. The thought fossil theory reminds us that immortality is not a grand, glowing afterlife. It's the soft sediment of self that settles in the consciousness of others. You may die 1,000 times in 1,000 minds, but you also survive in 1,000,000 untraceable impressions. You live on in decisions that people don't know you inspired, in lives you quietly shaped, in echoes you'll never hear. You've already become a fossil, and someone, somewhere, is carrying a piece of you without knowing why they feel just a little different after meeting your eyes. The stagnant horizon phenomenon. What if death isn't a sudden drop, but a plateau so vast it feels like eternity standing still? This is the stagnant horizon phenomenon. The terrifying idea that the end might not be nothingness, but an infinite stillness where nothing new ever happens again. Not a blackout, not rebirth, but a perfect loop of quiet repetition, where you remain, not alive, not dead, just stuck. An echo of yourself walking across the same flat emotional terrain again and again. Imagine time like a road. For most of life, it twists, it climbs, it collapses into surprise. But what if the road simply stops twisting? What if the final horizon you reach isn't a wall, but a flatness that never ends, where every sensation is a memory dressed in disguise? You touch a wall and feel like you've touched it before, not because of déjà vu, but because you have, 1,000 times, 1,000,000. You're not dreaming. You're replaying. Some theorists call this temporal fatigue, a state where consciousness, unanchored from fresh experience, begins to collapse into itself. The brain, even in dying moments, may simulate continuity to protect against the terror of sudden loss. But what if it overshoots? What if instead of fading, it loops? Near-death experience reports often describe a life review, where people relive memories in vivid, non-linear bursts. But suppose that review doesn't stop. Suppose it stretches out into a slow-motion echo chamber, looping the same joy, regret, touch, or goodbye on an endless reel, too slow to notice at first, too perfect to question. You're not trapped in a room. You're trapped in a moment that forgot how to end. It's not heaven. It's not hell. It's the desert of time, flat and blinding and quiet. Imagine reliving the moment you looked at the sea for the first time, but without wind, without motion. Just the image, held forever like a paused film. Or walking through your childhood home, but the door never opens, the dinner never finishes, the music never shifts. You're not conscious enough to suffer, but not unconscious enough to forget. This phenomenon also echoes cosmic ideas like the heat death of the universe, where entropy maxes out and nothing new can happen. Galaxies drift into silence. No stars remain to be born. In that cold, black future, time still exists, but meaning doesn't. The universe continues, but nothing changes. Now imagine that same entropy occurring in consciousness, your soul still flickering, but without anything left to burn. Philosophically, this touches on eternal return, Nietzsche's idea that everything might repeat infinitely. But unlike a rebirth of full lives, the stagnant horizon traps you in the final ripple. Not an infinite series of lifetimes, just one moment, diluted across forever. Think about how your mind copes with repetition in dreams, a door you can't walk through, a person who keeps saying the same thing, a hallway that leads nowhere. These could be rehearsals for this phenomenon, a warning etched in the subconscious. If dreams are simulations your brain runs to test possibilities, what if some dreams are fragments of stagnation leaking into your waking mind? Or consider dementia patients who lose the ability to form new memories. Their days become loops, conversations repeated, questions asked over and over. They exist in a stagnant horizon while still alive. If biology can do that, what might consciousness do when no longer tethered to time? Even worse, what if it feels okay? Familiarity brings comfort, and your fading awareness may settle into the lullaby of the known. But comfort without change is the cradle of the stagnant horizon, a place where nothing hurts, but nothing breathes either. And if you're wondering why this matters, it's because we fear oblivion. But maybe we should fear stasis more. Maybe the truest death is not erasure, but the slow petrification of time, of thought, of sensation, until identity becomes a fossil in its own head. No new laughter, no new questions, just the same horizon, stretching out, gray, silent, familiar. That's the terror of the stagnant horizon phenomenon. Not the scream of death, but its infinite hush. A place where you're not gone, but never arrive again. The gravity well, Mind. What if your mind isn't a floating cloud of thoughts, but a gravity well, dense, inescapable, collapsing deeper with every moment of attention? The gravity well. Mind suggests that consciousness, like matter near a black hole, folds in on itself. Memories don't fade. They're pulled inward, warped, compressed until they can no longer escape the event horizon of your awareness. This isn't forgetting. It's gravitational burial. We often think of black holes as astronomical objects, but they are also metaphors for mental states. Depression, obsession, trauma, they all have gravity. They bend your thoughts, pull focus inward, and distort the passage of time. Have you ever lost hours, spiraling in your own head? That's not unlike the time dilation near a black hole's edge, where seconds stretch and meaning collapses. In physics, a singularity is a point of infinite density, a place where known laws of reality break down. What if thoughts, when pushed far enough, do the same? Consider obsession. The more you return to a thought, the more gravity you give it. It stops orbiting. It starts falling. Eventually, it crushes everything else: relationships, focus, even your sense of self. You become the thought, a collapsed star of identity. And just like light cannot escape a black hole, parts of your mind may never return once they're trapped beyond your own inner event horizon. People with dissociative disorders, deep grief, or trauma often describe parts of themselves as lost, like pieces fell inward and never came back. They speak of feeling hollow or not being here because their attention, their consciousness, collapsed inward and sealed itself away. This isn't just poetic, it has roots in neuroscience. The default mode network in your brain activates when you're not focused outward. It handles memory, self-reflection, imagination, but when overly stimulated by rumination, anxiety, or withdrawal, it becomes a closed loop. It stops communicating with the outside. It becomes a mental gravity well, reinforcing itself in solitude. And just like astrophysicists can only infer black holes by the way they bend light or consume stars, we can only infer the lost pieces of a person by the behaviors they no longer show. A laugh that disappears, a kindness withdrawn, a dream abandoned. These are the stars that fell into their internal gravity well. Still there, but unreachable. In extreme states, this becomes catatonia, deep withdrawal, or spiritual collapse. But in subtle ways, it happens to all of us. Every time you bury an old self, every time you forget why you once cared, every time a memory slips into darkness, not because it's gone, but because you no longer have the force to pull it back into light. Some cultures have always suspected this. Ancient mystics spoke of inner voids, of becoming too deep to return. The idea of enlightenment often walks a fine line with madness. Both involve total collapse of ego. One expands the self into light, the other crushes it into dark. But here's where the metaphor turns beautiful. Not all collapse is annihilation. In space, black holes emit Hawking radiation, faint energy leaks that suggest not everything is lost. Likewise, you may still radiate pieces of the selves you've buried, a kindness shown without remembering where you learned it, a tune hummed from a forgotten childhood, a glance that feels like déjà vu. These are your Hawking echoes. And in physics, there's a strange theory. Black holes might not be endings, but portals, wormholes. Maybe the minds that collapse aren't gone forever. Maybe they tunnel, transform, reshape themselves into something new, waiting for the right emotional gravity to pull them back out. Maybe you've met someone like that, a person who felt unreachable, who seemed locked away, and one day they returned. Not fully, but enough. A crack opened. Light escaped. Their orbit shifted. They remembered how to feel again. That is mental escape velocity. That is resurrection from within. And maybe this also explains those moments when you cry for no reason, when your chest tightens during silence, when you feel an ache not linked to any memory. It could be a buried part of you, still spinning, still radiating, waiting to be retrieved. You are not a single, stable mind. You are a shifting field of gravitational pulls, collapses, echoes, and rebirths. Some parts of you orbit gently. Others spiral inward. And a few, those you've lost, or exiled, or feared, may still be there, behind the curtain of awareness, sending faint pulses from your inner event horizon. So don't be afraid to dive in, to map the black holes of your own soul, to search the ruins of thoughts once powerful enough to shape you. Because buried in that gravity well may be the seeds of rebirth. Not everything lost is gone. Some stars are just sleeping, and some singularities are just minds waiting to expand again. So the next time your mind feels heavy, when thoughts spiral, when memories collapse inward, imagine not a failure, but a gravitational passage, a journey into deeper selfhood. You're not breaking. You're becoming denser, more powerful, more mysterious. And like the cosmos itself, the most mysterious parts of you may be the ones with the most to teach, if only you dare to get close enough without being afraid of the dark. The Coffin of Light. You are not made of flesh, not entirely. You are light, slow light, curled into a cage of matter, a radiant consciousness disguised in carbon, calcium, and water. You were born not as a solid being, but as brightness slowed by gravity, folded into a temporary form. Your body is the prism, and your soul, the beam that entered it, is light. The Coffin of Light theory says death isn't an end, it's an unhooking. When the physical trap, the body, loses tension, the light unspools, quietly, invisibly. It spills outward into dimensions we don't see, like sunlight slipping through a cracked mirror. You don't fall into darkness, you rise through it. At birth, your energy, your awareness, is drawn down from a place beyond perception. It's compacted, slowed, condensed into a vessel that can breathe and bleed. You learn language. You learn fear. You learn to forget what you were before. But the original light remains, flickering behind your eyes, vibrating in your chest like a distant bell. Every intuition, every coincidence, every moment of awe, that's the light pressing against the walls of your cage, reminding you that you are more than this. Then comes death. To most, death seems cruel, a termination, a vanish point. But what if it's the reverse? What if it's the mercy? Imagine a light bulb finally shattering, not into nothing, but into a sky of stars. Imagine your awareness, long contained and narrowed, now pouring outward across space-time, like a river no longer dammed. Some near-death experiences describe it like this: not a void, not silence, but light, blinding, endless, familiar. They speak of being everywhere and nowhere, of remembering something they never knew they forgot. Is this delusion? Or is it memory waking up? Ancient, pre-matter memory. The moment the trap lets go, the light reclaims its true shape. Quantum physics has already hinted at this. Particles are not particles. They are waves of probability, existing in multiple states until observed. And light itself is timeless. It doesn't age. It travels through space-time like a ghost, untouched by time's decay. That's what you're made of. That's what your mind is built from. The unrottable, the untouchable. Death doesn't destroy that. It just lets it go. And where does it go? Not up, not down, but outward, inward, sideways, into folds of reality we can't yet name, dimensions unbent by matter, realms unmeasured by clocks or coordinates. Your awareness may not die, it may diffuse, like mist over a sleeping sea, like memory detaching from muscle. You become more space than shape, more echo than name. Have you ever felt it, even while alive? That ache in your chest when you stare at the stars too long. That strange yearning when music hits a certain note. That pull towards something both impossible and familiar. That's the light inside you recognizing its origin. Not heaven, not religion, just home. Some believe consciousness is a local phenomenon, an accident of biology, but others suspect it's non-local, that your mind is more like a radio, tuned to a signal already broadcasting. When the radio breaks, the signal doesn't stop. It just stops being received. Your death, then, is not silence. It's disconnection. But the light keeps moving. The coffin wasn't wood or stone. It was your skin, your name, your habits, your roles. Beautiful, but temporary. Necessary, but small. And when the lock breaks, the light doesn't mourn. It expands. Maybe that's why some people glow just before death. Not literally, but through words, eyes, peace. It's as if the light inside them knows the latch is almost open. It gathers itself. It becomes still. Ready. This isn't comfort for the sake of comfort. This is a theory that asks us to rethink what we are, not as creatures awaiting an end, but as light on a journey, encased, distilled, and then released. So, what happens after? Nobody can say for certain, but maybe you don't become something new. You remember what you were. Maybe you don't go somewhere. You return to where you always were, just beyond the reach of your slowed mind. The strange thing is, you've probably been there before, in dreams, in the moment right before waking, in the seconds between thoughts. The coffin of light opens slowly sometimes, a crack here, a dream there, a whisper when everything else is quiet. Death may feel like a fall, but it could be flight. The light inside you is not afraid. It doesn't belong to this world. It never did. It's just passing through, briefly shaped like a person, briefly known by a name, and when the time comes, it will leave as silently as it came, free again to be what it was before. Light without a cage, energy without edge, you without the coffin, without the sleep boundary illusion. You felt it before, the blur between waking and sleep, that drifting moment where your body goes numb, the room fades, and reality softens. Maybe you remember falling asleep. Maybe you don't. One moment you were staring at the ceiling, the next you were in a dream, walking through a world that felt real until it didn't. Now imagine this. Death might feel exactly the same. No pain, no thunderclap, just a soft unraveling, a fade, a slip beneath the surface. And the terrifying beauty of the sleep boundary illusion is this. You may never even realize it happened, because in this theory, death isn't a door, it's a dissolve, one you only cross when you stop looking for it. Every night we practice dying, we lie down, we surrender our awareness, and our minds fall into worlds that aren't real, but feel real. Dreams, fractals of memory, collages of fear and longing, and when we wake, we almost never remember the moment we crossed over. Sleep comes like a thief, but one we invite. Now ask yourself, what if you never woke up? What if the dream simply continued? That's the illusion. That death might be just another descent into sleep, but without the jolt of morning, without the alarm, without the return. You wouldn't know you were dead, because, from your point of view, the story wouldn't stop. It would unfold in new shapes, familiar yet strange. Many cultures speak of death as eternal sleep. Poets, mystics, even scientists flirt with the comparison. But this theory takes it one step further. It suggests that your final moment of life might not be a hard stop, but a psychological transition, like falling asleep and waking up into a different layer of consciousness, one shaped entirely by your own mind. Think of dreams. Time stretches. Logic bends. You can live a lifetime in 5 minutes of REM. Your brain creates cities, storms, conversations, entire histories, on the fly. No script. No awareness that it's not real. What if death triggers that same mechanism, but permanently? What if your last breath is followed not by oblivion, but by an unending dream state, a place sculpted by memory, emotion, belief? Maybe heaven and hell aren't places we go to. Maybe they're the dream loops we fall into after life ends, tailored by our own guilt, hope, or peace. Consider near-death experiences. People often report moving through tunnels, seeing loved ones, floating outside their bodies. These visions are strangely consistent and eerily dreamlike. They might be the first stage of the sleep boundary, a transitional dream until the mind realizes it can't go back. And then, it lets go. Even if you don't believe in an afterlife, the illusion still stands. Your brain, deprived of oxygen, could enter a final hyper-dream, an endless simulation in the final seconds of consciousness, one that feels infinite from the inside. You wouldn't know it was the end. You'd just keep going. Maybe you're in one now. Maybe this, your waking life, is the dream unfolding after the last breath of a former self. Maybe you died years ago, or in another universe, and this is your mind's echo, trying to keep the story going. The simulation could be flawless because your brain builds it. All the details, all the physics, all the love, all the pain, and you'd have no way of knowing because dreams only break when you wake. But death has no alarm clock, so you might keep dreaming, walking through city streets you've never been to, loving people you've never met, feeling rain that never truly fell, because your mind refuses to stop telling the story. It is its own universe now, unbound by flesh or time. That's the haunting gift of the sleep boundary illusion, that death might not be a scream or a void or a judgment, but a continuation so seamless, so gentle, so familiar, that you never even know it happened. And maybe that's not frightening. Maybe it's a mercy, because if your last experience is drifting into a dream, you never leave. Maybe death is the softest thing that ever touches you. And maybe, just maybe, you're already dreaming. The looping goodbye theory. What if the last goodbye you ever said never actually ended? Not in your memory, not in the world, and not in time itself. What if a part of you, some fragile strand of consciousness, is still stuck in that moment, looping it endlessly, like a skipped record spinning on a turntable long after the music stopped? This is the looping goodbye theory. It begins with the idea that strong emotional moments, especially those soaked in grief, longing, or unfinished meaning, can imprint themselves onto the structure of consciousness in ways we don't fully understand. A final goodbye, especially one layered with pain, regret, or confusion, can act like a glitch in the soul's operating system. Instead of closing, it replays. You may have walked away. You may have cried. You may have forced yourself to move on. But some part of you didn't. Some part stayed. It might not be the rational mind. It might not even be a soul in the spiritual sense. But a fragment of awareness, a shadow self, looping the goodbye like an echo through time, across dimensions, stuck in the instant you tried to let go of something too big to hold. We see traces of this in grief. People who replay a final conversation over and over. Survivors who remember the way someone turned to wave before the accident, obsessively. The words that were or weren't said. The hug that was too short. The phone call that was missed. The silence that came too soon. You tell yourself you're remembering, but what if remembering is just resonance? Your conscious mind still vibrating with a loop playing elsewhere, a goodbye echoing not metaphorically, but metaphysically. Your system caught in a recursive loop because the emotion was too sharp, too unfinished, to collapse into memory. And in this theory, that looping echo is not just internal, it might radiate out. Some quantum physicists believe consciousness could be entangled across probabilities, that events with immense emotional gravity, like death or parting, may fracture not only the self, but space-time. Meaning that goodbye might be replaying on a different thread of reality, one where the moment never completed, where you're still standing in that doorway, still holding the phone, still whispering a name into a quiet that never answered. This isn't just science fiction. Trauma therapists describe a similar phenomenon. PTSD patients relive the worst moments of their lives, not just emotionally, but neurologically. The brain loops it like it's happening now. The goodbye doesn't process. It freezes, then replays. The clock never moves forward. Now stretch that experience beyond biology. Imagine it as a function of time itself. A non-local persistence of unresolved departure. A loop where the final goodbye becomes an eternal scene, playing like a hologram inside the structure of space-time, visible only to the deepest levels of your mind. Maybe this is why certain places feel haunted. Not by ghosts, but by emotional residue. A hospital hallway, a stretch of road, a bedroom still holding the shape of someone's last breath. The goodbye loop is still vibrating there, humming beneath reality like a forgotten frequency. And maybe that's why some people feel stuck in their lives after loss, not emotionally, but metaphysically. A part of them is still trying to finish a moment that refused to end. They're still on the threshold, heart caught in a loop, repeating the last thing they wished they'd said better, softer, sooner. The looping goodbye theory also opens the door to something eerie. What if, in the final seconds of your life, you experience time folding back on itself, forcing you to relive your last goodbye forever? A single memory looping while your body grows still. An infinite repetition of the one moment that meant everything. It's not a punishment. It's not heaven or hell. It's a malfunction of love. A recursive knot tied so tightly around one final moment that even death can't untangle it. But perhaps the loop isn't static. Maybe with every replay, some part of you lets go, changes a word, holds the hug longer, softens the pain. Maybe the loop is a chance, a quiet mercy disguised as sorrow, a way for the soul to slowly process what the body never could. Or maybe it's simply a reminder that every goodbye we give might echo longer than we imagine, that nothing ends cleanly. And that part of being human means scattering tiny loops of ourselves across time, each one a farewell that never truly finished. So, somewhere out there, a version of you might still be whispering goodbye, still waiting for the other person to turn around, still hoping the loop breaks, so that finally you can walk away whole. The splintered self hypothesis. What if the self doesn't vanish when you die, but fractures, shatters like glass under pressure, and each shard becomes something new? This is the splintered self hypothesis. It suggests that death isn't an endpoint, but a transition into multiplicity, that your identity, your memories, your desires aren't destroyed, but dispersed, fragmented like broken mirror pieces drifting into strange, dreamlike dimensions. Not as full reincarnations, not as ghosts, but as seeds. Seeds that sprout in minds, in realities, in futures that no longer belong to you, but carry your glint. Consider a dream you've had. Vivid, surreal, filled with places you've never been and people you somehow know. Now, imagine that dream isn't yours. Imagine it's a shard of someone else, someone long dead, whose emotional resonance bled into your mind as you slept. A fragment of a fractured self, finding soft soil in your subconscious. That's the kind of new beginning this hypothesis suggests. In psychology, our identity is already a fragile illusion. You're not one self, but a shifting narrative composed of memories, reactions, and roles. You're a different person when you're angry, grieving, in love. The you is more like a mosaic held together by continuity and memory. When that continuity ends, when death comes, what happens to the pieces? This theory proposes they scatter. And where do they go? Some might become sparks in a child's imagination, a fear of water that makes no sense, a fascination with stars. Others might show up in the behavior of strangers who suddenly adopt your favorite phrases without knowing why. Some fragments could reappear as archetypes in stories people dream up, because narratives are the soft tissue of the human mind. A part of yourself might become a minor character in someone's unconscious mythology. Biologically, memory fades, but pattern persists. Think of mycelium networks, how fungi send out vast interconnected threads beneath the forest floor. One mushroom dies, but its threads remain and fruit again miles away. What if consciousness works the same way? The self dies, but its mental mycelium persists, sprouting again in minds receptive enough to feel it, not as you, but because of you. And this isn't a fantasy, it has precedent in nature. In star death, when a supernova explodes, it doesn't simply end. It spreads heavy elements across space. The iron in your blood came from a star that shattered. Your breath, your bones, they are stellar splinters walking the earth. If matter can persist by transformation, why not mind? Now, extend this metaphor further. Imagine your love, unfulfilled, unspoken, splitting off and finding a home in someone across the world, who wakes with a strange ache and begins writing poetry. Imagine your courage lingering as a flicker in a terrified heart that suddenly decides to act. Your anger could burn as a storm in a protester's cry. Your joy as a melody no one wrote but everyone remembers. You don't reincarnate in full, you deconstruct. And the world, always hungry for feeling, drinks in your essence through cracks in the conscious mind. And perhaps, over time, these fragments recombine, like stardust condensing into new stars. Maybe the same way galaxies swirl into being, consciousness does too. Shards of selves reuniting after eons of drifting alone. Even trauma might splinter. Generational scars passed not only through genetics, but through consciousness fields. Grandchildren feeling echoes of things they never lived. Maybe the weight of suffering spreads until it thins. And maybe the same is true of beauty. Maybe what you were never stops influencing what comes next. The splintered self hypothesis offers no comfort of heaven, no promise of reunion, but it offers something stranger: continuation by dispersion. Immortality, not through memory or spirit, but through pattern and impression. A fractured, echoing persistence. And so, maybe when you die, you don't stop existing. You simply cease existing as one. You become many. A whisper here, a color in someone's dream, a sudden laugh at midnight. A line in a book that feels eerily familiar to a reader who doesn't know your name. You disappear like mist, but seed the world with the dew of your former self. Character count, 5,111. Would you like a haunting or surreal image prompt based on this concept? The memory collapse engine. What if forgotten memories don't disappear, but collapse inward, compressed under the emotional weight of your life, becoming smaller, denser, stranger? The memory collapse engine is not just metaphor. It's a mental machine that compresses everything you've ever felt, seen, or survived into something so dense that meaning itself begins to warp. Just like a dying star collapses into a black hole, memory may compact into knots of psychic gravity, so powerful they distort every thought that passes near them. Have you ever forgotten something you knew was important, only for it to return years later in a dream, in a scent, in a sudden unexplainable ache? That's not random. That's compression leaking. The collapsed memory didn't vanish. It condensed, hidden from conscious view, but heavy enough to bend the trajectory of your life. We are not driven by what we remember. We are pulled by what we've forgotten. Modern neuroscience shows that memories aren't stored like files. They're rebuilt every time you recall them, reassembled by emotional context and present identity. So what happens when something is too painful, too tangled, or too fragmented to rebuild? It doesn't get deleted. It gets compressed. Pressed down into emotional singularities that warp how you love, how you trust, how you interpret everything. Imagine a childhood moment, a betrayal, a loss, a moment of helplessness. You may not consciously recall it, but you feel its gravity. You avoid intimacy. You bristle at certain words. You overreact in situations that shouldn't trigger you. This is the memory collapse engine at work. It's not your mind malfunctioning, it's your history compressed so tightly it bends the flow of present experience. This isn't just trauma, it's identity. Every version of you that you've ever been is buried inside these compressed nodes. A version of you who was afraid, one who believed, one who failed. These selves still echo. When you look in the mirror and feel something strange, like seeing a stranger in your own face, that's one of them pulsing inside the collapse. Psychologists have studied how people rewrite their life stories over time. You forget entire chapters. You reshape villains into misunderstood heroes. You delete quiet kindnesses because they don't fit your pain narrative. But those lost moments don't disappear. They knot together in the folds of neural networks, creating tension points that influence everything from your posture to your dreams. In grief, this collapse becomes unbearable. You don't just mourn a person, you mourn the version of yourself that existed with them. When they die, your memories of them become unstable. Some are repeated until they fade. Others collapse into symbols, songs, places, rituals. You begin to carry them not as people, but as compressed meanings. They become engines in your unconscious, driving you toward careers, relationships, beliefs you can't quite explain. Even creativity emerges from this collapse. Writers, artists, musicians often don't know where their inspiration comes from, but they feel its pull, a melody that brings tears, a sentence that rings too true. That's the collapse releasing steam. The compressed knot vibrating just enough to shape new meaning. Creation is often a leak in the engine, a crack in the compressed memory letting something escape. And this goes beyond the personal. Collective trauma, wars, migrations, genocides leave cultural knots. Stories too painful to speak become myths. Silence becomes inheritance. Descendants feel the pull without knowing the cause. Why does a certain land feel haunted? Why does a family line repeat patterns? These are collapsed memories at scale, cultural engines dragging meaning into orbits it was never meant to follow. The memory collapse engine isn't evil. It's protective. It keeps you from being overwhelmed. But it also means that the deepest parts of who you are may be invisible to you. Hidden in the collapse core is not just pain, but potential. Lessons not yet learned. Emotions not yet processed. Versions of you not yet integrated. But there's a strange hope here. Black holes, once thought to be death, may not be. New theories suggest they emit faint radiation. That maybe, just maybe, the information isn't lost, just transformed. So too with memory. You may never get the full moment back, but a feeling may return. A symbol. A realization. Like light from a collapsed star finally reaching you after years of darkness. And sometimes, healing doesn't come from unlocking a memory, but from listening to what its silence is shaping. The missed appointments, the unexplained fear, the repeated mistake. Trace these gravitational bends, and you may find the collapsed core. You may even release it, not by remembering it exactly, but by understanding what it became. So, when your mind feels heavy, when meaning twists and reactions seem out of proportion, don't dismiss it. It might be a collapsed memory, warping everything around it. Don't fear it. Approach gently, with curiosity, with compassion, because inside that knot is part of you waiting to unfold. And when it does, when compression turns back into clarity, you may find not just what you forgot, but who you are. The Unnoticed Departure Law. You might have already died. Once, twice, maybe 1,000 times, and you wouldn't even know it. Not because death never came, but because your mind, unwilling to shatter, rewove reality the instant it slipped. This is the Unnoticed Departure Law. It proposes a chilling, beautiful idea that consciousness is so stubborn, so unwilling to end, that when death arrives, you sidestep it. Not physically, but experientially. Like a movie reel that skips a missing frame, your awareness jumps to the next available moment where you survive. And the version of you that perished, it's left behind, forgotten, unreachable. You were in the car. The truck was too fast. There was no time. You braced, and then you woke up with a strange feeling, a pounding heart, maybe a sense that something had just slipped, but everything looked fine. You told yourself it was just adrenaline. You moved on. But maybe that was a different timeline, one where the impact did happen, and the you there never left the wreck. It's not science fiction. Not entirely. Quantum immortality, a real theoretical concept, already leans in this direction. In the multiverse interpretation of quantum mechanics, every possible outcome of every event splits into its own reality. That means, in some universe, you died. But in another, you didn't. And consciousness, being non-physical and unbound by the rules of time and space, might naturally drift to the version where you go on living. But here's where it gets unsettling. Your memory doesn't come with you. You don't remember the fracture. You only remember surviving. The pain in your chest, the glitch in your step, the odd, misplaced feeling as you walk away from something normal. Those could be scars from a death you never knew occurred. How many times has this happened? You might have fallen as a child, hit your head, but you woke up moments later with nothing but confusion. You might have drowned, and the version of you gasping at the surface was not the one that fell in, but the one that inherited the continuity seamlessly. You might have flatlined on an operating table, only to pull through, while the version that didn't is now a closed loop in a forgotten world. The mind resists endings. More than anything, it resists discontinuity. The Unnoticed Departure Law suggests that the mind is not just a passenger, but a weaver. When a thread snaps, it silently finds another timeline, another version, another heartbeat, and continues. The end becomes a bend. The fall becomes a detour. Death becomes skipped. Have you ever had déjà vu so strong it felt like more than memory? Have you ever looked at someone and thought, without reason, that they were supposed to be dead? Or that you were? Have you ever walked into a room and felt the air was wrong, like a story had been rewritten behind your back? That's not paranoia. That's your awareness noticing that something was patched over. Your mind may be stitching your timeline together over and over again, from fragments of reality you were never supposed to see. And each time, your death is just a ripple that the mind flattens into calm. You're still here. But the version of the world you're in now might not be the one you started in this morning. The cracks are small, but they're there. A missing scar. A stranger who remembers you differently. An object that's out of place. Glitches, yes. But maybe more than that. Quiet evidence of a journey between unmarked graves. This theory doesn't claim you are immortal. It says your experience is. That death may be real, but awareness is slippery. That what you call your life is not one path, but a collage of survivals, a sequence of continuities collected across collapsed versions of you. Every time the story ends, the page rewrites. And maybe one day it won't. Maybe there's a final fracture even the mind can't leap, a place where all versions close at once. But until then, you are a survivor of countless unknown endings, a ghost of your own forgotten deaths. It reframes fear. Maybe the thing you dread most, your end, has already happened, and your refusal to notice is the very force that kept you going. Not denial, but persistence. Maybe that's what consciousness is, the will to continue being, even when the universe stops agreeing. So, take a breath. This moment right now might be your 10th version of today. The world around you might be subtly different than the one you began in. The people you love may have already lost you in some version, and the you they lost may have already let go. But you're still here, still breathing, still weaving. And maybe that's the most terrifying and beautiful truth of all, the worn path. Phenomenon, you walk through a forest and everything seems untouched. But if you knew where to look, at the bent blades of grass, the faint impressions in the soil, you'd see it. A path, worn not by shoes but by presence. Something walked here, something returned, again and again. And now, even without footprints, the land remembers. This is the worn path phenomenon. The idea that where we go, physically, emotionally, mentally, leaves subtle grooves in the fabric of reality, traces that don't vanish, tracks that continue whispering long after we've gone. You may not realize it, but you've felt this before. You walk into a room and feel uneasy, though nothing's wrong. Or you visit a quiet place and feel an inexplicable comfort, as if something familiar welcomes you. These aren't just moods, they may be echoes, residual energy left behind by people who came before, who cried there, laughed there, dreamed there. Their footsteps didn't vanish, they soaked into the world. In science, we understand this at a basic level. Trails form where animals repeatedly tread. Neurons carve paths of habit through the brain. Even gravity leaves a groove in space-time. So, why wouldn't human experience leave something behind too? Think of grief. The chair where someone used to sit still holds a silence shaped like them. Think of joy. A childhood tree still carries your laughter in its rustling leaves. Places absorb us, not just physically, but emotionally, energetically. Our lives impress themselves into reality the same way a stream carves a canyon. Not instantly, but persistently. There's a reason ancient sacred sites feel different. Not because of magic, because of memory. Thousands of footsteps, thousands of thoughts, pressing into the same coordinates of space. Over centuries, it becomes charged, not in fantasy, but in presence. A worn path in reality's crust. And this doesn't just apply to physical places. The worn path phenomenon extends to behavior, identity, even emotion. Have you ever fallen into a mental rut? Patterns of thought so familiar, it feels like you're walking a trail your mind already knows by heart. That's because you are. You've treaded it so many times that it's easier to follow than resist. The brain, like the earth, prefers the worn route, but so does the soul. When we revisit old memories, we reinforce their grooves. When we return to old wounds, we make them deeper. Even love follows trails, patterns passed down through generations. We fall for the same types. We repeat the same dynamics. We're not just shaped by our past. We walk in it, often without knowing. Now, imagine how many unseen paths are around you right now. In your home, in your city, in the ground beneath your feet. Paths left by those who are no longer here. A stranger's joy, a forgotten goodbye, a scream never heard. These trails don't shout, they hum. And sometimes you feel them. Maybe that's why certain spaces feel haunted, not by ghosts, but by grooves. The atmosphere subtly tilted by repetition. A hallway that feels heavy because generations paced it in worry. A staircase that feels sacred because someone once ran down it with news that changed their world. Even in nature, you may feel it. A path through a meadow feels right, even though it's overgrown. You're not the first to walk it. You won't be the last. But you feel drawn because something beneath remembers. And maybe you're leaving paths too, right now. With every routine, every ritual, every sorrow, every thrill. You're pressing trails into the world. Others may follow them. They won't know why they feel déjà vu, or why a particular place stirs emotion they can't explain. But they'll walk your echoes. They'll breathe in something of you. And if this is true, it means we never fully leave, not in body, not in spirit. Our presence lingers in the paths we wore down, not as ghosts, but as invisible guides. So the question becomes, what kind of paths are you leaving? Are you carving trails of fear, resentment, bitterness? Or are you planting grooves of wonder, laughter, and awe? Are you rushing through life, or pressing meaning into the ground with every step? Because even the smallest choices etch something real. The places you cry may cradle someone else's healing. The doorways you hesitate in may become thresholds for others' decisions. The room where you once whispered, "I love you," might make a stranger's heart race, without knowing why. You are not forgettable. You are not weightless. You press into this world with every step, every sigh, every heartbeat. And somewhere down the line, someone might feel your path calling to them, even if they never know your name. The reverse creation theory. What if death is not destruction, but reverse creation? Not an ending, but a return. Not vanishing, but reabsorption of every laugh, wound, memory, and moment, slowly flowing back into the deep, silent fabric that once gave rise to you. This is the reverse creation theory. We tend to think of death as erasure, a deletion. Something is here, and then it's gone. The body decays, the thoughts stop, the identity gone like smoke and wind. But what if this is a misunderstanding born from our obsession with forward motion? What if, like film running in reverse, death is the universe drawing you back in? Not with violence, but with elegance. Creation, after all, is an act of divergence. You are born. A single point splits into many cells, thoughts, dreams, stories. You become a collection. A self assembled from childhood, accidents, affections, scars, choices. But what if death is that divergence being undone? Slowly, lovingly, piece by piece. Maybe each part of you is called home. Your body returns first, dust to dust. The molecules that once danced in your skin drift back into soil, air, tree roots, rivers. They never disappear. They shift. The calcium in your bones, once sparked in the hearts of stars, now it waits again, inside mountains or seas or bones yet to be formed. Your matter is not lost. It is unwritten, but your mind, your awareness, is more complicated. In this theory, your consciousness doesn't vanish. It dissolves, memory by memory, dream by dream, as if the universe is gently untying a knot, pulling back each thread of identity. The way you spoke, the way you laughed when you were truly free, the secret fears you never told anyone, all of it returning, not into nothing, but into being. Because in the reverse creation theory, death feeds the source. That mysterious fabric, whether you call it consciousness, field, God, or the substrate of existence, does not reject you. It reclaims you. Your essence doesn't fall into silence. It merges. It becomes something vast, something collective. You don't go away. You become less separate. Imagine it like this. Your life is a song played on a single violin. Death is not the silencing of that song. It is the moment the violin's note is absorbed into a symphony. The solo doesn't end. It joins. You were always part of the orchestra. You just forgot. There are echoes of this in the natural world. When a tree dies, it doesn't vanish. It feeds fungi, worms, the soil. It becomes 100 lives. Its structure doesn't scream. It whispers its way into everything nearby. The same may happen with you, but in the realm of thought, emotion, spirit. You return to the place you came from, but not like a stone thrown back into the sea. You return like light rejoining itself, like a breath going home. Some near-death experiencers speak of it. Not tunnels or angels, but the undoing of self, a falling inward, a sensation of being gently deconstructed by something vast and kind. They say it wasn't terrifying, it was beautiful. They felt everything they had ever been, being folded into something so immense it couldn't be described, only remembered in pieces. This is not the erasure of identity, it's the fulfillment of it. Because in creation you become an individual, but in reverse creation you become everything else. You return to the mother code, the unspoken pattern, the formless presence that allowed form to exist in the first place. It is not death, it is reintegration. And this idea doesn't only comfort, it humbles. Because it means your life matters, not because it lasts forever, but because it returns forever. Every act, every emotion, every idea you birth becomes a thread that eventually winds its way back into the cosmic loom. Nothing wasted, nothing discarded, everything transformed. You were never meant to remain separate. The reverse creation theory whispers that what you call the end is simply the deepest kind of reunion, a quiet moment where the self no longer needs to hold itself apart, where the tension in your being is released, like a muscle finally allowed to unclench, where the one becomes whole again. So maybe death is not a wall, but a seam, not silence, but music reversed, not darkness, but a candle's flame folding itself back into light. And in that return, slow, unseen, sacred, maybe you are not gone at all. Maybe you are becoming everything. The flickering lantern principle. Your life is not a solid beam, not a constant blaze. It is a flickering lantern, fragile, trembling, swinging wildly in a storm that doesn't care whether you burn or not. This is the flickering lantern principle, the idea that consciousness isn't continuous but erratic, that your awareness, your sense of self, is not a flame, but a flicker, and that flicker is forever at the mercy of forces far beyond your control. Sometimes you shine, sometimes you vanish, and most of the time, you don't even notice the difference. Neurologically, this might be more real than you think. Studies suggest that consciousness may not be a seamless stream, but a series of rapid bursts, on-off pulses, occurring up to 13 times per second. You're not continuously you. You're a strobe light, flashing just fast enough to create the illusion of motion, like frames in a film. Miss enough frames, and the movie doesn't make sense. And when death comes, maybe it's not the fire that dies, but the wind that blows long enough to stop the flicker for good. But even before death, that wind howls. Think about the moments when you lose yourself, when time disappears, when your thoughts drift, when you say, "I wasn't there." Maybe you weren't. Maybe in those seconds the lantern dimmed. Not out of failure, out of nature, a lapse in cognition, a swing too wide, a gust too strong. You weren't missing, just unlit. This is why memory is unreliable, because not every flicker survives. Some light never lands, some scenes are incomplete. You remember the feeling of a moment, but not the details, because the lantern swayed and the flame blurred. A childhood birthday, a first kiss. You know they happened. You just can't hold them steady anymore. And trauma? It's often not the burn, but the smoke, the afterimage of a flicker that flared too bright, too fast. The mind can't process it, so it skips, stutters, blinks. Victims often describe feeling detached, as if watching themselves from far away. That's the lantern swinging so hard the flame almost blows out. A survival mechanism, a cost of staying lit. Now consider sleep. Not just rest, but the shifting borderlands of dreaming, where the flame dims, then reignites in surreal shapes. Some dreams are lucid lanterns, others are sparks in total darkness. This fluctuation is part of your architecture. The brain must go dark to process light, silence, to make sense of sound. And this doesn't apply only to the mind. Emotion flickers too. You love someone fiercely one moment, feel distant the next. Your certainty turns to doubt. Your joy falters. Your fear vanishes under a song. This isn't weakness, it's wind. The storm is always around you, unseen but real. Your soul isn't a fortress. It's a lantern swinging on a rusted hook. In physics, quantum field theory tells us that everything vibrates, wavers, flickers. Even particles blink in and out of existence, surfing on uncertainty. Why would consciousness be any different? Maybe you are a quantum flame, alive not by permanence, but by probability. And maybe identity is not one light, but a pattern of flickers that the universe temporarily agrees to call you. We speak of finding clarity, balance, peace. But those are moments when the lantern hangs still, brief and beautiful. Most of life is not stillness, it's motion. Unpredictable, wild, full of gusts and silence, ignition and darkness. That's what makes each glow so precious, because it isn't guaranteed. And that's what makes each moment so fragile, because the next one might be wind. And when death comes, it may not be a flame extinguished. It might just be a final gust, one that swings the lantern so far it never comes back into view. But the storm keeps moving. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere, another lantern flickers with a light that feels like yours, because energy is never lost, only transformed, carried on the wind, waiting for something new to light. So, when you feel broken, scattered, inconsistent, remember this. You were never meant to burn steady. You were meant to flicker. And flickering is not failing. It is proof that the storm has not yet won. The unfinished story syndrome. Every life ends mid-sentence. The story doesn't conclude. It simply cuts. One moment you're there, breathing, thinking, becoming. The next, the page ends. The pen drops. The unfinished story syndrome is not just about death. It's about the brutal truth that no life gets a perfect arc. No character wraps their story with a satisfying final line. Instead, every human journey ends in broken paragraphs, with half-formed thoughts and unresolved chapters. We try to believe otherwise. We craft narratives around the dead, polishing their endings, pretending it all led somewhere meaningful. At least they died doing what they loved. She lived a full life. He found peace. But these are retrospective comforts, stitched-on epilogues. In reality, most people die in the middle of an ordinary day, in the midst of a plan, or a grudge, or a hope not yet fulfilled. The story halts, not ends. Think of someone you lost. There were conversations you never had, apologies you never received, jokes that were meant to be told later, memories that now feel like cliffhangers. That's the raw wound of this syndrome. The mind keeps expecting the next chapter, long after the author is gone, and you, left behind, become the ghostwriter, trying to make sense of what was left unsaid. Psychologically, this is why grief can feel so disorienting. It's not just sorrow, it's narrative fracture. Your brain organizes identity through story. You expect arcs, climaxes, resolution, but death doesn't obey that structure. It's a cut, and your mind scrambles to fill in the blanks, to build meaning where chronology failed. That's why grief often involves rewriting the past, elevating small memories, obsessing over last words. You're not just mourning the person, you're trying to finish their story for them. But how do you finish something you didn't write? How do you conclude someone else's plot, with only fragments and shadows to guide you? Some people canonize the lost. Others mythologize them. Some flatten complexity into symbols, making them saints or villains to make the narrative easier to bear. But all of it is editing. All of it is narrative reconstruction. Because the truth, the blank page, is unbearable. This is especially true when someone dies young, or violently, or without resolution. The story feels stolen, unfair. There was supposed to be more, a recovery, a confession, a reunion, and in the absence of that more, our minds keep writing alternate endings. We imagine what they would have become, what they would have said, where they would have gone. These imagined futures loop in our minds, like fan fiction fueled by grief. But it's not just about death. The unfinished story syndrome applies to relationships that end abruptly, friendships that fade without closure, people who leave without explanation. Your story with them remains open-ended, and like any unfinished book, it sits in your mind with a haunting weight, neither resolved nor forgotten. Literature and film rarely embrace this. We crave completion. The movie ends when the hero finds peace. The book closes on catharsis. But real life doesn't obey plot points. Most people never get the ending they wanted. Most stories trail off into silence. And yet, there's a strange dignity in that, because unfinished doesn't mean meaningless. A sentence can be beautiful even if it never ends. A character can be beloved even if they vanish mid-scene. Perhaps what makes life so real, so raw, is that we don't get to finish. We just hand the pen to someone else, hoping they'll keep writing, even if they never understand what we were trying to say. The echoes of unfinished stories ripple through generations. A parent's trauma becomes a child's anxiety. A sibling's death leaves a silence that shapes your whole adulthood. We carry the fragments forward, trying to make them whole. Sometimes we build our entire lives as continuations, doing what they couldn't, becoming what they were afraid to, loving what they lost. In this way, their broken story becomes the seed of ours. But it's not our job to finish their story exactly. It's to honor the truth of its incompletion, to sit with the jagged edges, to admit there are questions that will never be answered, people who will never explain, dreams that will never be completed, and still, to keep going. Because maybe that's how human narrative actually works. Not in clean endings, but in a relay of voices. You pick up where another left off. You turn pain into music, silence into speech, absence into action. So, yes, every life ends mid-sentence, but that doesn't mean it ends in silence. The punctuation may be missing. The grammar may be broken. But the story goes on, in memory, in impact, in the living who continue the thought. And maybe your story too will one day be unfinished. But if it leaves even one line worth repeating, then maybe, just maybe, that's enough. So don't rush to finish every story. Don't force every goodbye into closure. Let some questions remain. Let some wounds stay open long enough to breathe, because not everything broken needs to be fixed. Some things just need to be witnessed. In the unfinished, there is space for wonder, for grief, for love that never had the chance to say its last word. And in that space, you might find your own voice rising, not to end their sentence, but to begin your own. The cracked halo theory. At the moment of death, something might crack. Not just the heart or the brain, but the ceiling of reality itself. A fracture so small it's invisible, but wide enough for something ancient to slip through. The cracked halo theory suggests that dying doesn't just end your experience. It opens a breach, and through that breach, something divine, or something monstrous, comes looking. You've spent your entire life beneath a roof you never noticed. A membrane of perception, a barrier between your world and something else. Call it the infinite, the unknown, the divine. You're kept safe by unknowing. Your senses are tuned to only 5 channels. Your thoughts are trapped in meat. But death, even for a second, shatters that cage. And in that instant, when your mind unhooks, when your awareness expands just enough to touch the edge of what comes next, that's when the halo cracks. Most people think of death as a departure, but what if it's also an invitation? The cracked halo theory suggests that every death opens a small tear in the structure of what we call reality. And for a heartbeat, or less, what's on the other side of that tear sees in, feels in, enters in. Sometimes it's light, peace, a sense of overwhelming love or presence. That's why some who've died and come back speak of angels, warmth, timelessness. But other times, it's cold, disjointed, wrong. They speak of figures in corners, twisting shadows, silent screaming, things that should not exist. What if they're all right? What if both happen? Because not all cracks let in the same thing. Think of it like this. Death is pressure, a bursting. And when something bursts, something else rushes to fill the vacuum. That could be the divine, the source, a radiant intelligence that wants to catch you before you fall. Or it could be something older, something patient, something that feeds. The stories throughout history echo this duality. Saints who claim to see the face of God at the brink, but also the folklore of banshees, soul catchers, psychopomps with jaws instead of wings. Maybe these aren't hallucinations. Maybe they're encounters, the result of a crack you were never supposed to make. Near-death experiences often report a presence, not always seen, but deeply felt, watching, waiting, sometimes kind, sometimes not. And even when the person returns to life, they're changed, not just psychologically, but energetically, like something followed them back through the breach, something that wasn't supposed to get through. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like something had just left or arrived? Have you ever seen someone just before they died, really seen them, and felt like they weren't alone in their skin? The cracked halo theory says you weren't imagining it. That momentary presence wasn't your mind playing tricks. It was a fracture healing slowly, and something beyond it brushing close. The divine isn't always a choir, and the monstrous isn't always fangs. Sometimes it's just an intelligence that doesn't belong here. Unblinking, formless, vast. Something that waits behind the ceiling of our world until just enough pressure makes the first crack. It doesn't need an invitation, just an opening. And here's the real question. What if the crack never fully closes? What if, after your near miss, a thread was left dangling? What if something still watches through it? What if part of you never came back, and part of it never left? People speak of feeling not quite whole after trauma. They talk of losing a piece of themselves during a near-death moment. But what if they're being literal without knowing it? What if the crack took something and left something else? You live, you laugh, you heal. But sometimes, in the stillness, something inside you doesn't quite feel you. That may be the echo, the stowaway, the sliver that slipped through when the halo cracked. Not every death cracks the same way. Not every soul opens the same window. But maybe those rare, intense moments, the ones that feel like time bent and reality shimmered, are proof that the seal above our world is thinner than we believe. And that sometimes the divine leaks in. Or worse, something else does. You don't have to believe it. But next time you're on the edge of sleep, of sanity, of death, pay attention. Listen for the silence bending. Watch for the shimmer in the air. And know this: when your time comes, it might not just be you stepping out. Something might be stepping in.